Chapter 620. Below Wanxiang City, there was a short period of peace after the battle. The power of the landmines had frightened General Gordon. He was not prepared to launch any more attacks before the Han civilians from the rear were sent up. Since he was the one attacking the city, he had the initiative. Furthermore, Wulong City had already prepared food for the army. There would not be any problems defending the city for a few months. Since there was no need to go to war for the time being, General Gordon summoned the singers who followed the army and held a party in his tent. He also called his generals and General Fan Yuhai to enjoy the joy of the interlude between wars. 8 young women with great figures were dressed in faintly discernible gauze. Their waists were swaying in the tent. Gordon and the other generals sat around them and laughed from time to time. Their gazes followed the movements of the women as they enjoyed the feast that was brought to their eyes. Gordon, who was sitting at the front, had already set his goal of warming the bed tonight. He wanted to fight for 300 rounds to get rid of the bad luck on his body. Just as he was indulging in his fantasies, a bodyguard quietly entered the tent with an ugly expression. He walked to his ear and whispered in a low voice. "What?" Suddenly, Gordon's face turned red, and the wine cup in his hand flew out with a bang. This movement attracted the attention of the other generals, and the 8 women screamed in shock. "Scream, scream, what are you screaming for? Get out of here." Gordon waved his hand. At this moment, his eyes were filled with a strong murderous aura. It was as if he would kill anyone who dared to appear in front of him and offend him. The 8 singers hurriedly left the tent, leaving behind only a few generals in the tent. Fan Yuhai raised his eyebrows and then frowned deeply. He had a feeling that something bad was about to happen. "General, what happened?" A captain who was Gordon's absolute confidant asked in confusion. "Something happened. Wulong City was invaded last night. Our 50,000-strong army was defeated and was forced to retreat to the south. Our rations and weapons in the city were all burned. Damn it." First, he used a calm voice to report what he had just heard. Then, killing intent burst out from his eyes. It was as though he wanted to materialize a saber light to kill someone. There was silence in the tent as everyone digested Gordon's words. However, very soon, a general said in disbelief, "That's impossible. We are right here. The 4 gates of Wanxiang City are tightly shut. It's impossible for them to send an army to surround us." "That's right. The Lao's army won't go around us. The armies of other countries are all our allies. They won't attack us secretly. Could it be the work of mercenaries? But how did they get behind us? Could it be that they fell from the sky? We launched the first attack 2 days ago, and those people took action at night. That's too fast. Even if they are mercenaries, it's impossible for them to send out their troops in such a short time. They must have bypassed us to attack. There are 50,000 of our soldiers in the city. Even if they are mercenaries, they won't be able to occupy the entire Wulong City if they don't have enough soldiers. It's even more impossible for them to inflict heavy damage on our army. Could it be the work of other countries?" The generals below spoke one after another. They mentioned various possibilities, but they were all rejected one by one. Gordon's face darkened. He didn't speak. According to the battle report, the people who came were armed with advanced firearms, so they should be mercenaries. However, the battle report didn't mention the number of soldiers. What did that mean? Did they forget to mention it? That was impossible. There could only be one answer. They still didn't know how many enemies there were. Half of the 50,000-strong army was blasted out of Wulong City. They didn't even know how many enemies there were. How terrifying was that? Didn't that mean that the enemy had a lot of soldiers? However, wasn't the main force of the mercenaries taken away by the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty to attack the Phnom Penh dynasty? Where did the enemy come from? Gordon was deep in thought. The generals were also deep in thought. Even Fan Yuhai was deep in thought. The only difference was that Fan Yuhai had locked the enemy on the mercenaries even though he didn't get any accurate information. In his eyes, he was very clear about the military strength of the surrounding countries. Only the mercenaries could break into the city and defeat the 50,000-strong Siamese soldiers in one night. However, how did they appear there? After all, they had only appeared at Wanxiang City 2 days ago and launched their first attack. How could the mercenaries react so quickly? The entire battle took less than 5 days. Even a flying man couldn't have done it. Unless, when he thought of the only possibility, Fan Yuhai's expression changed drastically. Could it be that the mercenaries were already prepared and knew that they would attack Wanxiang City? Hence, they planted a large number of soldiers behind them. If that was the case, once the Siamese army launched their attack, the mercenaries started their attack on Wulong City? Yes, that must be it. If all of this was true, the Ming dynasty's Duke of Loyalty was too good at scheming. His attacks were ruthless and the military strength behind him was much stronger than what was shown. He even had the ability to split his troops to attack Siamese and the Phnom Penh dynasty. No. It should be more than that. Since he had arranged a backup plan in Siamese, his other ally, the Kingdom of Ava, must have also arranged a backup plan. Hiss. Fan Yuhai sucked in a breath of cold air. At this moment, Fan Yuhai suddenly felt that Yang Qindong was very terrifying. This person was not only good at calculation, but also had a more outstanding military vision than ordinary people. He also had powerful firearms and an unknown military strength. How could such an opponent be defeated? Question marks flashed in his mind. At this moment, Fan Yuhai suddenly had an idea. He wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. He had repeatedly challenged the mercenaries and Yang Qindong. First, he led the Lansang kingdom into the whirlpool of war. Then, the Lansang kingdom was destroyed. Then, he had the idea of forming an alliance between the 3 countries. However, now that the Phnom Penh dynasty and Siamese kingdom had been attacked to different degrees, as the initiator, how could he not be targeted by Yang Qindong? If Yang Qindong really wanted to deal with him, would he be able to stay safe with his 5,000 elite cavalry? No, such a person was too dangerous. He had to leave this place first. At least before he had enough strength, he would not appear in front of Yang Qindong. When he appeared again, he had to make all the necessary preparations. After making up his mind, Fan Yuhai did not speak anymore. He did not even have the intention to help General Gordon analyze the situation. He kept his mouth shut. General, I don't think it's the time to talk about this. Even if Wulong City's provisions have been burned, we have to be prepared to leave this place. Otherwise, if the enemy behind us and the enemy in Wanxiang City attack us from both sides, how are we going to face them? Besides, if the army loses its provisions, it will definitely cause chaos. We have to leave this place quickly while the soldiers below are still unaware. We have to gather new provisions for the next battle. One of the generals said after analyzing the gains and losses. The other generals nodded in agreement. That's right, General. We have to retreat. Yes, we have to leave. We can't let them attack us from both sides. Gordon slammed the table and said. Then, he looked around and fixed his gaze on Fan Yuhai. General Fan, what do you think? Fan Yuhai wanted to say, if we leave now, aren't you afraid that the mercenaries will attack us halfway? However, he thought that if he reminded Gordon, he would definitely hold his ground. Who knew what the mercenaries would do? If they were really attacked from both sides, wouldn't it be very dangerous for him and Gordon to stay together? Since that was the case, it was better to let them leave. At that time, whether or not they were attacked by the mercenaries, they would escape halfway. At least he would be safe. The world was big, but he was the most important. Fan Yuhai nodded. It's time to leave. How about this, I will bring my 5,000 cavalrymen and retreat last, just in case. Sigh, speaking of which, my cavalrymen were not of much use in this siege. I feel ashamed. He wanted to hear Fan Yuhai's opinion, but he did not expect him to take the initiative to bring up the rear. This made Gordon's eyes brighten. He sighed and said, General Fan is a righteous man. Thank you for your hard work. Don't worry, if the mercenaries catch up from behind, you only have to hold them off for a while. I will send reinforcements to support you. Okay, thank you. Fan Yuhai stood up and cupped his fist with a sincere face. However, he thought coldly in his heart, who would believe that you would come to my aid when I am attacked? With someone bringing up the rear, it was much easier to retreat. In order to prevent any accidents from happening, Gordon decided on the spot to retreat now. They would rush through the night and try to reach Wulong City the day after tomorrow. At that time, they would guard the city tightly and ask the king for rations so that they could regroup and fight again. With all the generals present, there was no need for a meeting. Soon, the order was given and the generals went to prepare. After 2 hours, the army had already packed up their tents and started to retreat towards Wulong City. Then, the rest of the army followed suit and left Wanxiang City in a long line. On the tower in the south of Wanxiang City, General He Guang was looking at the scene before him through a pair of binoculars. Because of the landmines, Wan Shaoqian did not stay on the tower. There were too many things in the city that he needed to deal with, so he left everything here to He Guang. Because of this, he was also confused when he saw that the enemy had actually started to retreat. Chapter 621. He raised his binoculars again and again to make sure that he was not mistaken. The enemy had indeed retreated. He quickly said to the messenger beside him, "Go and inform Governor Wan that the situation has changed. Ask him to come here as soon as possible." Half an hour later, Wan Shaoqian arrived at the gate tower on his bicycle. When he arrived at the gate tower, he listened to He Guang's report and raised his binoculars as well. He saw the Siamese army retreating. How long have they been doing this? Wan Shaoqian put down his binoculars and was puzzled. Reporting to the governor, they have been retreating since half an hour ago. I have calculated that the number of retreating soldiers has exceeded 10,000, and it seems like they will continue to retreat, He Guang reported with a face full of doubts. So, they have really retreated? But why? Wan Shaoqian could not figure it out and frowned. I don't know, He Guang answered honestly. He wanted to ask Governor Wan why. He Guang knew that it would be useless to ask He Guang. He thought for a moment and said to the messenger beside him, "Turn on the radio immediately and contact the 6th young master. Report the situation here as it is." The waiting time was always long. On the open land 5 miles away from the gate tower, the Siamese army was still retreating. Just from the looks of it, they should be serious. However, this was even more puzzling. The attack was only temporarily blocked, and only a few thousand of the 100,000 soldiers died. Why did they stop fighting? The morale of this army was too low. "Sir, the 6th young master has called back." The messenger ran all the way to Wan Shaoqian and handed him a telegram. Wan Shaoqian, who was puzzled, quickly picked up the telegram. After a few glances, he could not help but shout excitedly, "Good, good, haha, ha ha ha." He Guang, who was beside him, was even more confused. "Governor Wan, what did the 6th young master say?" "Here, take a look at it yourself." Wan Shaoqian was in a good mood at that moment, so he casually handed the telegram to He Guang. After reading it once, her eyes widened in disbelief. She couldn't help but read it again. Then, with a surprised look on her face, she said, "The 6th young master said that the mercenaries attacked Wulong City and defeated the 50,000 Siamese soldiers there. They even burned the enemy's provisions. This is too powerful, but where did the mercenaries come from?" Wan Shaoqian also couldn't figure it out, but he wouldn't show it in front of his subordinates. As a superior, it was appropriate for him to remain mysterious in front of his subordinates. Thus, he chuckled and said, "This is not something you should consider. You only need to know that Wanxiang City is safe." Yes. He Guang also knew that he couldn't be fully trusted by the mercenaries right now. There were some things that he couldn't ask casually. However, Now that Wanxiang City was safe and the Siamese soldiers were retreating, he was wondering if he could take advantage of the situation. Thus, he told Luan Shaochen his thoughts. When he heard He Guang say that he wanted to go out and fight a drowning dog, Luan Shaochen thought for a while and shook his head. We have too few soldiers. If we go out, it will be dangerous. If the enemy counterattacks, the consequences will be unimaginable. It's better not to take the risk. There was only one company of soldiers guarding the city, 2 auxiliary battalions, and 10,000 Laotian mercenaries. If they really went out, only the auxiliary soldiers of the Leng vanguard would be able to take advantage of the situation. However, their numbers were too small. Instead of taking the risk and reaping huge rewards, it was better to stay put. After all, there would be more battles in the future. These were the words of an experienced strategist. Luan Shaochen made this decision because the number of soldiers he had was limited. They could defend the city, but it wasn't enough to go out and kill the enemy. Secondly, the 6th young master's telegram didn't ask them to attack. Thus, the 6th young master probably meant the same thing. Thus, they watched as the Siamese army left. Of course, there was an even more important reason. Defending Wanxiang City was a mission in the first place, and it was enough as long as he could complete this mission. What he had was only a standing army, and not an invincible main force. 5 miles away from the city, the Siamese military camp set off. Fan Yuhai and his 5,000 cavalrymen had already gathered at a spot and were watching the scene unfold with indifference. If one took a closer look, they would realize that they had already prepared everything. Once something unexpected happened, not only would they not cover the retreat, but they would also rush out at the first moment and escape without a trace. That was the truth. Fan Yuhai might have said that he would bring up the rear, but once Wanxiang City's city gates opened, he would definitely be the first to escape with the cavalry. After all, they were faster on horseback than the foot soldiers. Fan Yuhai's nerves were stretched taut. When the sky turned dark, all the Siamese army had retreated. However, there was still no movement from Wanxiang City. This made Fan Yuhai heave a sigh of relief. All right, now that everything is fine, we should leave. Fan Yuhai seemed to be talking to himself. Then, he scanned his surroundings for a moment. He knew that after leaving this time, he didn't know when he would return. Perhaps, he would never return. The Siamese army left Wanxiang City in a long line. Close to 100,000 soldiers formed a formation that spanned more than 10 miles. When the sky turned dark, they lit up their torches. From afar, it was even more spectacular. On the way back to Wulong, the mercenaries led by Leng Song had already set up an ambush in the dense forest on both sides of the road. Everyone had a good night's sleep during the day. Now, everyone was full of energy. They held on to their steel spears and stared at the retreating Siamese army with sparkling eyes. Gordon was quite capable. Although they were retreating, they didn't panic. The 1,000-man teams were well coordinated and didn't have any obvious weaknesses. Once one of the 1,000-man teams was attacked, the other 1,000-man teams would be able to provide support immediately. With the front and rear looking after each other, they would be able to minimize the losses. An ordinary army would be helpless against such a formation. However, it was a pity that they were facing a mercenary army. Furthermore, the mercenary army was prepared and had won the battle. Therefore, they were at a disadvantage in terms of morale and preparation. What was the purpose of ancient wars? Morale and preparation naturally played a very important role. Currently, the mercenaries had the advantage in these aspects. They had already won half the battle even before the battle started. Furthermore, night battles were their forte. It would be difficult for them to not win this battle. The only thing that mattered was how much they could achieve in this battle. Leng Song seemed to have known that the Siamese army would retreat in an orderly manner. As the commander, he had already come up with a countermeasure. That was to split up the troops. Didn't you have the front and rear looking after each other? Didn't you attack a location and the nearby troops would be able to provide support? Good. What would you do if I suddenly attacked and dealt you a huge blow? Could you really have the front and rear looking after each other? Hence, in the dense forest by the road, the 8 auxiliary battalions were divided into companies. This resulted in 32 small units that were positioned at different locations for the ambush. The 3 cold vanguard battalions of the 1st Regiment became the mobile troops. They would provide support wherever the battle was intense. These 3 battalions were further divided into 36 platoons. They were positioned at the surrounding areas of the auxiliary troops. This was to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Just as the mercenary army was about to set up the ambush, the enemy finally appeared. According to the previous plan, the mercenary army did not attack immediately. Instead, they allowed the enemy's vanguard to pass by. Once the enemy's main force entered the area, it would be time for the mercenary army to attack. In the dense forest area, the most unbearable thing for people were the mosquitoes in the forest. Not only were there a lot of them, but they were also large and carried a weak poison. Once bitten, it wouldn't take long for a big blister to form, making it extremely itchy. In such an environment, ambushing and staying here for a long time was a test of one's willpower. Speaking of which, these mosquitoes would not consider whether or not they would bite you just because of your skin color or your intentions. As long as you had flesh and blood, even if you were a wild beast, you would be a delicious meal in their eyes. After ambushing here for more than 2 hours, all of the mercenaries' faces were covered with all kinds of large swollen bumps. If they had not worn gloves in advance, their hands would have been covered with bumps. This would have greatly affected their accuracy. Endure it, endure it. The same firm voice echoed in every mercenary's heart. The Cold Vanguard Battalion did not want to be looked down upon by the auxiliary troops. They had to endure it. Besides, they had undergone similar training countless times. Even though their faces were itchy, it was not that they could not endure it. It was just that it was a test of willpower. The auxiliary troops were also enduring it. They wanted to perform better so that they could join the Cold Vanguard Battalion. Before the battle, Commander Leng Song had said that after this battle, those who performed well would have a chance to join the Cold Vanguard Battalion. Even the 6th young master had agreed to this. The political department was already prepared to vet them. This was a chance to join the Cold Vanguard Battalion. This was the wish of almost all the auxiliary troops. In order to achieve this goal, in order to return home in glory, in order to prove that they were the strongest young men, what was a mosquito bite? They just had to endure it and endure it. As mentioned earlier, mosquitoes would not target a single person. While the mercenaries were enduring the inhumane bites, the Siamese soldiers who were walking on the road beside the forest were also suffering from the same bites. The only difference was that the further one was from the forest, the lower the chance of being bitten. Oh, these damn mosquitoes, they bit me. It hurts, it's so itchy. Chapter 622. That's right. I've killed 3, but it's not enough. They keep coming at me. It's so annoying. After the soldier heard his companion's complaint, not only did he agree, but he also waved the torch in his hand from time to time, as if he wanted to use this action to drive away the annoying mosquitoes. You idiots, can't you stay away from the forest? The farther you are, the safer you will be, just like me. Another soldier said proudly. Everyone noticed that the soldier was about to leave the army and walk to the other side of the road. It was far enough from the forest, so it was naturally safer. That's right. You're smart. The other soldiers immediately agreed. Then, more and more people started to leave the forest and walk to the other side of the road. The Chiliarch naturally noticed this, but he did not say anything. He was also on the other side of the road. After all, the mosquitoes would not let him go just because he was a general. They were a very fair species. The general did not reprimand them. Some timid soldiers also moved to the left side of the road, trying their best to keep a distance from the forest. It was dangerous to do so. Some people had already raised the possibility that there might be mercenaries ambushing them in the forest at night. If there were, the closer they were to the forest, the safer they would be. Once they were attacked, the closer they were, the faster they could rush to the enemy. This would ensure their safety to the greatest extent. Now, the army was walking on the left side of the road. Although it was only a dozen meters away, if a fight broke out, the dozen meters would be an uncrossable trench. At first, this idea was very popular. However, as night fell and more mosquitoes began to appear, no one said it anymore. What kind of joke was this? They were standing on the main road and were already as far away from the forest as possible. There were still so many mosquitoes. If they stayed in the forest, wouldn't they become a lump of meat? Who could withstand such a test? At least, if the Siamese soldiers thought that they could not withstand it, they would naturally think that others could not withstand it. In this way, the so-called threat in the forest seemed to be non-existent. This also made the Siamese soldiers who were walking along the edge of the forest let down their guard. They only focused on driving away mosquitoes and hurrying on with their journey. In the dense forest, Ling Song was also suffering from mosquito bites. His face was already densely packed with small bumps, and these bumps were still expanding. However, if the other soldiers could endure it, as the division commander, he had no reason not to persist. He gritted his teeth and endured it. Once there are too many mosquitoes, the repellent that the sixth young master had people make is useless. Ling Song sighed softly and stared fiercely at the enemies more than 200 meters away. He decided to kill as many enemies as he could to avenge the mosquito bites tonight. The hour hand of the watch was turning, and with this movement, the enemy's main force had finally entered the forest, and the vanguard of the rear army had also stepped in. After calculating the situation in his mind, Ling Song knew that the time to attack had come. As long as he opened fire, the smell of gunpowder would be able to drive away some of the mosquitoes, let alone during a battle. Who would think about mosquito bites? Ling Song took off a pair of black leather gloves, revealing his uninjured hands. He held a Type 95 pistol tightly, adjusted his breathing, and prepared to shoot. He could even feel the mosquitoes staring at his hands, but he did not care. His eyes were indifferent, and his face was calm. He aimed the muzzle at a captain of the Siamese army. Then, his finger gently pulled the trigger. A bullet flashed through the night like a meteor, leaving a dazzling red trail in the air. Bang! As the gunshot rang out, the enemy Chiliarch fell to the ground. If one could look closely, one would see that the bullet had pierced through his head. His eyes were wide open, and he could not be more dead. This shot was the signal to launch a general attack, and what followed was the dense sound of gunfire. The sound of gunfire seemed to be everywhere. After a wave of attack, the Siamese army lost countless bodies, and their formation was in chaos. Without any defense, and with the torches in their hands, what were they if not live targets? It was not until the second wave of gunfire rang out, and countless Siamese soldiers were killed that the smarter generals came to their senses. They shouted and threw down their torches. One by one, the torches were thrown away or extinguished, and the surroundings were plunged into darkness. The gunfire was not as fierce as before, and only occasionally, it could be heard under the moonlight. The power of the flintlock had caught the Siamese soldiers off guard, and it also destroyed their pride. Many of them lay on the ground and did not dare to move, as if they were afraid that they would attract the attention of the mercenaries and become the next live target. Gordon was also attacked, and several of his bodyguards were killed. Under the cover of the other bodyguards, he was pressed to the ground and avoided the danger of being shot. He was protected by his bodyguards, and even if he was discovered, there would be a human shield in front of him, and he would not die. However, this was not what Gordon wanted. At this moment, his face was pale, and he did not know if it was because of the pain of being pressed down by his bodyguards, or because he was angry. The siege of Wanxiang City had failed, followed by Wulong City. Now, they were ambushed by the mercenaries, and he did not know how many of his 100,000 soldiers would be lost. As the general leading the army, he felt extremely humiliated. If both sides were to fight fair and square, he would lose because his skills were not as good as his opponent, and there would be nothing to say. However, the mercenaries were simply playing tricks on him. They were either relying on the advantage of firearms, mines, or other weapons, or ambushing him. This made him feel powerless, as if he had punched cotton with all his might. Initially, he was still proud of his long snake formation, and even thought that it would be best if the mercenaries appeared. This way, he would be able to counterattack and win. However, after being ambushed, he realized how wishful his thinking was. He knew to disperse his army, but did the mercenaries not know? Now, it was not just one spot that was attacked, but the entire army. How was he going to break through? The surroundings were pitch black, and all the torches were extinguished. Regardless of whether they were attacked or not, all of the 1,000 soldiers were lying on the ground. It was as if this was the only way to ensure their safety and survive. Bastard, bastard, counterattack. What's the use of extinguishing the torches? Are you waiting for death? Although he was in a sorry state, and in order to save his life, he had to block more than one bodyguard in front of him. However, this did not stop him from reprimanding others and sending them to their deaths. Pass down my order, counterattack. There can't be too many enemies. Otherwise, they wouldn't be hiding and would take advantage of the situation to charge over. Quick, counterattack. I'll kill anyone who doesn't counterattack. Gordon's yelling was heard in the darkness. His yelling was extremely clear in such a quiet atmosphere, and it made many Kiliarch's expressions turn ugly. If they attacked, they might die, but if they didn't attack, they would die too. Thinking that dying in battle would be considered a sacrifice for the country, and at least their families would be safe, some of the Kiliarchs had no choice but to yell at their subordinates. Everyone, stand up and charge forward. The enemy is in the dense forest. As long as we charge forward, they won't have any advantage in close combat. I'll kill anyone who doesn't charge. The Kiliarchs did not forget to say the last sentence. Previously, they were still cursing Gordon for bullying the weak, but now that they thought about it, wasn't it the same for them? After the generals gave their orders, the soldiers were the ones who suffered the most. They did not have the ability to bargain with the generals. Under the orders of the centurions and the supervision of the decharges and corporals, the soldiers at the lowest level were forced to stand up. Then, in groups, they began to approach the dense forest on the right side of the road. If it weren't for the fact that they were worried about being bitten by mosquitoes, they would be standing at the edge of the forest right now. With a single gunshot, they would be able to rush over as quickly as possible and force the mercenaries to engage in close combat with them. But now, it was useless to say anything. In history, there was no such thing as if or if. Everything depended on strength and a trace of luck. The soldiers were forced to get up from the ground one by one and carefully walk towards the dense forest. It seemed as though there were mines buried under their feet. If they were not careful, they would be blown up into the sky by the powerful explosion. However, the attack they expected didn't happen. After walking forward for a distance of 50 meters, gunshots were still heard in front of them. It was as though everything that happened just now was a dream, an illusion. This change gave more people courage, and they stood up as well. Then, they groped their way through the darkness and headed towards the dense forest. Could it be that the enemy retreated after one wave of attacks? That must be it. Otherwise, the gunshots would have been heard long ago. Ha, it seems like there aren't too many enemies. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given up such a good opportunity. If that's the case, what are you waiting for? Let's go. This is our chance to show off. The Siamese soldiers began to talk among themselves. Then, their footsteps began to quicken and become lighter. It was as if the mosquito bites were no longer happening. Bam, 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 bam. Just when the Siamese soldiers thought that they were safe, a barrage of gunshots rang out again. This time, it was as loud as the first wave of attacks. The Siamese soldiers were caught off guard, especially those who were the fastest. They were the first to die. Like harvested wheat, they fell to the ground one after another. Even when they died, their eyes were still wide open, as though they couldn't understand what had happened. Chapter 623. Get down! One of the generals shouted. Immediately, the charging Siamese soldiers fell to the ground obediently. Their movements were so fast that it was as if they had practiced this countless times. Poor General Gordon had just stood up under the protection of his bodyguards when gunshots rang out. Once again, he was mercilessly pressed to the ground. He could not help but chew on a piece of mud in his mouth, which made him angry and ashamed at the same time. The sound of gunfire continued. From time to time, figures would rush out of the forest. Then, grenades would fall on the heads of the Siamese soldiers who were close to the forest. Retreat! Retreat! Crawl backward! Following the explosions, more and more soldiers fell to the ground. Some Kiliarchs hurriedly gave out orders. Then, a shocking scene happened. On the main road, countless people were frantically retreating. With this speed, even if they were the members of Cold Vanguard, some of them would probably pass the test. This should be the effect of potential. When a person was faced with death, he could always explode with unimaginable speed. As the Siamese soldiers retreated to their original positions, the gunshots and grenade explosions gradually stopped. Silence reigned over the land once again. Being tricked once wasn't something to be afraid of. A horse could stumble. However, if he were to fall for the same trick again and suffer a loss, then he would be considered stupid and would not learn from his mistakes. Hence, after this, even when Gordon's roar came from the darkness again, none of the Kiliarchs moved. With the mentality that the law could not punish the majority, if no one moved, could it be that your brother, the great general, would kill all of us Kiliarchs? If he really did that, it would not be long before a mutiny broke out. After shouting so many times that his voice was almost hoarse, the army did not move at all. Gordon gave up shouting. Forget it, forget it. He would just wait like this. Once the sun rose and everyone could see their opponents clearly, it would be time for him to counterattack. He did not believe that he would lose again at that time. This scene was similar to when Chen Bo dealt with the 100,000 soldiers of the Lansang kingdom. They were also forced to lie on the ground to ensure their safety. The only difference was that the terrain this time was not good. Leng Song had limited manpower and could not capture the 100,000 soldiers again. Pass down the order. The auxiliary soldiers will retreat first. The cold front will be the last to retreat. After dawn, gather at Wanxiang City. Leng Song gave the order reluctantly. He thought that he could fight a good battle, but he was helpless against these cowards. After all, he couldn't let the army charge forward. Firstly, their line of sight would be obstructed, and secondly, their forces were too few. If they really charged forward and engaged in close combat, they would be the ones to suffer. This was an outcome that he absolutely did not want. The mercenaries began to retreat into the depths of the forest in an orderly manner. Then, they turned and headed towards Wanxiang City. The Siamese soldiers on the road did not dare to guess or test the waters. This was because it would mean sacrificing countless lives. No one wanted to die, so they might as well stay where they were. The cold wind blew past them from time to time. Mosquitoes would also take the opportunity to bite them. The Siamese soldiers could only endure and curse in their hearts. They cursed the mercenaries for targeting them. They cursed their general for being useless. What kind of war was this? Time passed slowly and the sky gradually brightened. The dew fell and the mosquitoes were also affected by it. They began to leave one by one. When the white fog dissipated, the Siamese soldiers finally launched their counterattack. They rushed into the forest as if they wanted to perform well. However, what awaited them was no one. Even the cold front, who were the last to retreat, had all retreated an hour ago. Under the protection of his bodyguards, Gordon stood up straight again. However, his eyes were red, indicating that he did not rest well last night. General, the enemy is no longer in the forest. What should we do next? All of the major commanders and Kiliarchs began to gather around this general before asking questions with fawning expressions on their faces. After all, they had shown their fearful side last night. Now, they were afraid that their general would settle the score with them. Gordon wanted to settle the score with them. However, if he really dealt with these generals, who would lead the army? If these generals gathered together, they might even turn against him. He could only remember this incident in his heart. He waved his hand and said impatiently, "What else can we do? Continue to retreat. Let the army speed up and rush to Wulong City for breakfast." He could not deal with these generals, but he could still do something. Punishing them for not eating breakfast was a temporary way to vent his anger. Of course, this was also because Gordon wanted to rush back to the city as soon as possible. Once he entered the city, he would be much safer. After this battle, the Siamese army lost another 10,000 soldiers. With less than 90,000 soldiers and 10,000 injured soldiers, the Siamese army finally returned to Wulong City in the evening of the next day. When he entered the city, he saw the destroyed streets and houses. There were even some fireworks that had not been completely extinguished. Gordon knew that this base was finished. It would take at least a few months to rebuild it. This meant that the plan to attack Wanxiang City would have to be abandoned halfway. He would have to return to the capital with shame. Leng Song naturally did not care about what Gordon was thinking. 2 battles, 2 victories. More than 4,000 soldiers wiped out tens of thousands of enemy soldiers. Most importantly, he did not suffer any losses. This result was satisfactory. With a face full of excitement, he arrived at Wanxiang City. Wan Shaoqian had already received the news and was waiting for these heroes with a group of people. What was different from when Good Dan entered Wulong City was that good wine and tea had already been prepared. Everyone had a joyful expression on their faces. Wanxiang City was safe. As the governor, Wan Shaoqian was naturally the happiest person. Although he was not afraid of war, he knew that once a battle broke out, the order in the city that had just gotten back on track would be destroyed. He did not know how much he would have to pay to get back on track. Fortunately, the 6th young master had calculated everything. The retreat of the Siamese army was a reality. With the 4,000 soldiers led by Leng Song, even if the enemy attacked again, they would not have to be afraid. With the advantage of weapons, Gordon would definitely return empty-handed. After Leng Song's troops returned to the city, another piece of good news was sent over via telegram. Just yesterday, the Awol dynasty also sent out 50,000 soldiers. However, they were quickly met by the Vietnamese mercenaries Hung Jin and Ruan Jianqing's 20,000 men at the strategic town of Panging Valley in the northwest of Laos. There was no chance for the Awa dynasty to launch a surprise attack, so they happily withdrew their troops. Just like that, Siam and Awa's attacks were disrupted. The people of Laos finally did not have to live in fear anymore. They could continue doing what they were supposed to do. When the news of Laos reached Yang Qindong's ears, the 6th young master at Suong City heaved a sigh of relief. Although all of this was within his expectations, no one could guarantee that there would be no accidents. Now that the dust had settled, he could finally relax and focus all his attention on Suong City. They still haven't sent anyone to negotiate with us. Yang Qindong placed his hands on his waist and stood in front of the temporary headquarters. He looked at the tall city in the distance and asked Tiger's Mane. "Young master, not yet. There's news from the security bureau. Leader Yun is still in the middle of an operation. He should be here soon." Tiger's Mane reported. "Good, since that's the case, we'll increase the price. Some people just don't learn from their mistakes. Give the order, fire with all your might. I want to see how long they can hold on." Yang Qindong's eyes flashed. Due to his own foundation, he did not have the intention to take down the Phnom Penh dynasty this time. The 4.5 million Han people in Suong City were in the process of being transformed, but the news was not ideal. These people were all refugees that the southern Ming dynasty had to abandon. They were uneducated and were born to hard labor. They were also timid, and all they wanted was to have a bite to eat and survive. For such people to change in a short period of time, to give them confidence and dignity, it was not something that could be done in a day. Although the political department and the publicity department had put in a lot of effort, it was impossible to use it without a year. In addition, they had to learn culture, at least to be able to read, which may take longer. When the two provinces of Vietnam and Laos were established, 200,000 educated youths in Suong City had been used. To take over the entire Phnom Penh dynasty, at least 100,000 educated youths were needed. This reserve was gone, and it would take time to train them again. This was Yang Chindong's difficulty. Without enough foundation, how could he build high-rise buildings? In the end, he decided that this time, he would only fight against the Phnom Penh dynasty. He wanted to show his muscles through this incident to ensure that no one would bully him in Vietnam or Laos when he was not here. The main reason that forced Yang Chindong to make this decision was not only the lack of educated youths, but also the emergence of an unexpected event. The honeymoon period between Baiming and Walla suddenly ended. The Security Bureau sent news that a war seemed inevitable. The reason turned out to be that Shi Biao, who was in charge of the security of the trade, blackmailed Walla merchants. The close relationship between the two sides suddenly became like fire and water. Chapter 624. Shi Biao was Baiming's Marquis Wu Qingho and also the nephew of General Shi Heng. Naturally, his uncle Shi Heng would take responsibility for the trouble he caused. No one knew how it ended up in such a situation where the two sides were about to go to war. Once Baiming was about to go to war with Walla, Yang Chindong had to pay attention to it. He had too many concerns there. He had decided to take a look at the grassland in the north after dealing with the matters in the south. There was a vast land with many strong horses. He wanted to organize an army of cavalry, just like Genghis Khan, to sweep across the Eurasian continent and conquer the world. Before that, the matter of the Golden Bien dynasty must be solved. However, to Yang Chindong's surprise, he did not intend to swallow the other party, but the other party did not intend to negotiate either. Since that was the case, there was no need to be polite. He would just bombard them with artillery fire. This was also a unique way of pressuring them. Yang Chindong ordered, and the 100mm mortar was put to use again. Shells were fired at Suong City on the opposite side. With each shell falling, countless buildings were destroyed, and countless soldiers and civilians were killed. This was not the first time that the artillery was fired at the city. The powerful destructive power had caused the people in the city to begin a mass migration. After all, no one knew whether the next shell would fall on their heads. Especially Yang Chindong's order was the kind of random bombardment without a set target. Even General De N in the city did not know where the next shell would fall. This made him tremble in fear every day, and he did not feel safe at all even if he changed places to sleep every day. All he could do was to keep urging people to return to the country and ask His Majesty to agree to the peace talks. After all, this feeling of living in the shadow of death every day was not good. Golden Bien City, where the capital of the Golden Bien dynasty was located. The top officials of the dynasty had been discussing how to deal with the aggressive mercenaries for a few days, but there was still no consensus. The ministers were divided into two factions. One faction was in favor of war, while the other was in favor of war. Overall, the pro-war faction still had a certain advantage. They had already received news that both Siam and Awad had sent troops to Laos. Once they received good news, the mercenaries would definitely retreat. At that time, it would be time for the pro-war faction to strike and reclaim their lost territory. When King Boromir saw this, he did not respond to the mercenaries' attempt to negotiate. He wanted to be the first king to defeat the mercenaries. However, he was destined to be disappointed. Both the Siamese and Ava armies had retreated. It was only because of the lack of transportation that the news did not reach his ears. The residence of the right Prime Minister of Golden Rim City was located in a very prosperous area of the city. Two 2-meter-high stone lions stood in front of the gate day and night, showing the noble status of the owner of the house. In fact, in the Golden Bien dynasty, the right Prime Minister Dun did have a lot of power, second only to the king. He was on par with the left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei. Perhaps to deal with the rumors of discord between the two, or perhaps because King Palomo did not wish to see his subjects too united and thus threaten his own position, the two ministers had been arguing over various issues all this while. Sometimes, the left minister would win, and sometimes, the right minister would win. This time, facing the issue of whether to fight or to negotiate with the mercenaries, the two prime ministers had different opinions. The left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei was in favor of war, while the right Prime Minister Dun was in favor of peace. Under the leadership of the two of them, the court officials were naturally divided into two factions and followed their lead. Because the king had certain expectations for Siam and Ava, the current situation was that the left Prime Minister had a slight advantage, while the right Prime Minister was slightly passive. Today, after the court, the right Prime Minister Dun returned to his residence with an unhappy face. He went straight to the backyard. As if it had become a habit, Yunk liked to go to the backyard of some important ministers. It seemed to be safer there. This time, he was staying in the backyard of the right Prime Minister's residence. Duen arrived with a displeased expression. When he saw Skylark's seat resting on a recliner with his eyes closed, he couldn't help but complain even before he walked over. Sir Yun, I can really sleep. Don't you know that we're about to send troops to Suwon City? Send troops? Yunk, who was lying on the recliner, slowly opened his eyes. Yes, the left Prime Minister Ding Ding Wei is leading more and more officials to suggest sending troops. I can't stop it. I think you should leave Golden Bien City quickly. Du Che seemed to like to see Yunk's surprised look. From the moment this person appeared until now, he had been acting as if nothing had happened, which made him feel very displeased. No matter what, he was still the right minister of the country, with a high position and power. Yet, just because he had accepted 200,000 taels of silver from the other party, he had not only detained the other party at home, but he was also running around in the imperial court for the other party. Now that the situation was becoming more and more unfavorable, he had already decided to stop. As for the 200,000 taels of silver he received before, sorry, he had spent a lot of effort on this trip. Didn't he need to be compensated? Oh. Yunk blinked his eyes, then leaned his head back and began to rest again. Dun, who had turned his head and said this, was still waiting to see Yunk's panicked look. The other party might even beg him. If he was happy, it would not be a problem to accept some money from the other party to ensure his safety. If he was unhappy, then he would just wave his hand and drive him away. What a joke, do you really think that mercenaries are the best in the world? Why don't you look at the situation outside? The mercenaries have become an existence that everyone wants to beat up. He turned his head to the side and waited for a few breaths of time, but there was no movement at all. Out of curiosity, he turned around to take a look and saw Yun Kei lying down with a satisfied and comfortable look on his face. He immediately became angry. Mr. Yun, didn't you hear what I said just now? I'll tell you. Without waiting for him to explain the seriousness of the matter, a piece of white paper with words written on it appeared in front of him. The other end of the paper was gently held by Yunk. What? What is this? His face was filled with doubt. Could this be the banknote that the other party gave him to save his life? But it didn't seem like it. With curiosity in his heart, Dun still reached out to take it. He wanted to see what the other party was up to. If he still dared to play tricks with him, then he would definitely let the other party know that he, the Horse Lord, also had 3 eyes. He took the paper and found that it was indeed not a banknote. There were only a few lines of words written on it. Out of instinct, he looked at the words one by one. Along with it, his originally condescending and arrogant expression also changed. After reading it for the first time, his arrogant expression had already disappeared. After reading it for the second time, cold sweat began to appear on his forehead. After reading it for the third time, the way he looked at Yunk had completely changed. Previously, it was a condescending look, but now, it was filled with great shock and even a hint of flattery. Mr. Young, where did this come from? Are you joking? Slowly opening his eyes, Skylark chuckled. Joking? Do you think I would joke about this with the right Prime Minister? Let me tell you, this is the battle report I just received. It's 100% accurate. How about it? You should know what will happen next, right? At this time, Young was very certain and was full of confidence. People said that a weak country had no diplomacy. And diplomacy could be divided into several types. For example, their infiltration work was also a diplomatic method. Young was very capable, but first, he still needed a platform. A platform that could give him a chance to perform. The mercenaries were getting stronger step by step, and winning every battle was a platform for him to perform. It was with this guarantee that he could carry out his work like a fish in water. He could use all his methods and perform wonderful infiltration battles. This time, the mercenaries did not let him down. When everyone thought that they would suffer heavy losses and even lose their status, who would have thought that under the command and planning of the sixth young master, the scales of victory would lean towards him again? Young was still lying there, and he didn't even have the intention to get up. But now, Dun didn't mean to blame him, or he couldn't care less about it. He was standing there and constantly wiping his cold sweat, thinking about the situation that the Gilded Dynasty would face next. What was written on the paper was the situation at the front line. It was sent to Skylark by wireless telegram. It clearly recorded the defeat of the Siamese army and the failure of the Awa army. They had no choice but to retreat. What was written on it was what the Gilded Dynasty relied on before. If what was written on it was true, then the Gilded Dynasty would have no reinforcements, and the whole country would be in danger. As the right Prime Minister of a country, Dun naturally knew what this meant. In the worst-case scenario, the mercenaries would be like beasts coming out of the mountains. They could open their bloody mouths and bite the Gilded Dynasty at will. If they wanted to, it was not impossible for them to bite the Gilded Dynasty to death. Thinking of such a result, and thinking that His Majesty wanted to continue to send more troops to Suwon City, wasn't that tantamount to angering the mercenaries? At that time, there would be no need for peace talks. They would just fight until one side was crippled. But no matter how he looked at it, it seemed that only the Gilded Dynasty would be crippled. Dun's face changed again and again. At this moment, his mind was spinning rapidly. He slowly came up with an idea. That was to take the initiative to ask for peace before the other side sent out troops. A slap would never hit a smiling face. As long as their posture was humble, it was still possible to negotiate successfully. After all, the army of the Golden Bien dynasty had not been completely damaged. They still had the power to fight back. Once the other two allies saw that they were resisting desperately, they might send troops for the second time. Chapter 625. The opportunity was right in front of him. Dun, who had made up his mind, no longer had that mocking expression on his face. Instead, he put on a flattering smile and took half a step forward. Sir Yun, can you open your eyes and tell this Prime Minister what the Duke of Loyalty and Courage has in mind? After all, we are now neighboring countries. It's better not to hurt our relationship. Dun took the initiative to lower his head. Young was not surprised by this. If there were still people who wanted to start a war with the mercenaries after receiving this information, they would either have already given up on life and death, or they would have other ideas. He could not help but sigh in his heart. The sixth young master also sent a telegram, saying that they could agree to the peace talks, but they had to try their best to obtain benefits. This time, Yang Chendong did not act like he did with the Jiaoji and Lansang kingdoms. He did not send troops to destroy the kingdoms. In the end, it was not that he had become merciful, or that his ambition had been satisfied. On the contrary, everything was done for the sake of the overall situation. Without enough resources and manpower, even if they sent troops to destroy the Phnom Penh dynasty, they would only be picking up a mess. Not to mention, if they really fought, the price they would have to pay would be too high. No one could guarantee that Siam and Ava would not send reinforcements again. The mercenaries did not want to face such a situation before they were fully prepared. With the idea of mutual destruction, no one knew what kind of power these two kingdoms would erupt in the face of a life-and-death crisis. Once their armies really entered the Vietnamese and Laos provinces, the losses would be immeasurable. Without sufficient preparation, Yang Chendong did not want to face this situation. Because of this, Yang still had a lot of work to do. Otherwise, he would have already laid his cards on the table with Duane. It was either death or surrender, and he would have just made a decision. After sighing in his heart, Skylark finally stood up from the reclining chair and stood in front of Duane. "Right, Prime Minister, this time it was you who provoked the mercenaries first, and then we sent out our troops. Even if we were to send out our troops, we would inform you beforehand that you would have to give us a definite answer after the emissary returned to Wanxiang City. And it's precisely because of your arrogance and rudeness that we're meeting on the battlefield, isn't it?" "Yes, yes." Du Si lowered her head like a child who had done something wrong and nodded repeatedly. Some people said that this time, it was the mercenaries who started the war without declaring war, but that was not the case. Everything was just as Yunk had said. The emissary from Laos had given them a chance, but no one had taken it seriously at that time. That was why Shangding City was suddenly breached and Jujing City's 100,000 soldiers were defeated. "Alright, since Right Chief Minister has already admitted that it was your fault this time, then whether my mercenary army will fight or shake hands with you will depend on your performance and what you are willing to pay. In short, this time, don't take my words seriously. Otherwise, you won't be able to buy medicine for regret anywhere. Alright, I'll wait for you here. You can also go and verify the authenticity of the information. In fact, there's no need to verify it. Your scouts should be able to send the news back in 2 days. But if you haven't made a decision by then, my mercenary army will take the initiative to make the decision for you." "No, no." Duan kept shaking his head. Previously, because he had placed his hopes on the allies of the two countries, he wanted to send troops to the front line to pressure the mercenaries. Since he knew that his allies had been defeated or had retreated, it was very clear what to do. Duan's attitude was arrogant and even a little arrogant. But when he left, he bowed with every step, like a child seeking advice from a teacher. He was extremely respectful. After finally leaving the backyard, Duan's expression returned to its serious state. "Men, prepare a sedan. I want to enter the palace to see His Majesty." It was not that Duan didn't doubt the authenticity of the information provided by Yunk. But Yunk had already made it clear that he would not wander around and would wait here, and the news would be confirmed in 2 days. Did this person eat a bear's heart and leopard's guts to joke about such a matter? If everything was true, then it was necessary for him to report the situation to the king. It was better to be prepared than to not know anything at all. In the king's palace, Duan stood in the side hall. Opposite him sat King Boromir. Boromir was a little fat, and he was wearing a golden royal robe. He narrowed his eyes. "Right, Prime Minister, I have thought about it. The left Prime Minister's words are not unreasonable. Since Siam and Ava have already sent news, they will definitely send troops. As allies, we should also send more troops to the front line to pressure the mercenaries." Boromir was very clear about the reason why Duan wanted to see him. In the morning, the two prime ministers had been arguing in the court. In the end, Duan's faction became weaker, and even he, the king, leaned towards Dingdingwei's opinion and continued to send reinforcements. Boromir did not understand why Duan wanted to see him. Could it be that he wanted to continue persuading him? "Your Majesty, this is the information I received. Please take a look." Duan did not explain anything. He only presented the information he received from Yunk. He believed that once the king saw this, his attitude would change drastically. "You just received this information?" Boromir looked at Duan with a puzzled gaze. The right prime minister did not have the authority to gather information, so where did he get this information from? Puzzled, Boromir took the paper with the words written on it from the eunuch beside him. After looking at it casually, his eyes widened and his body began to tremble. In the end, even his hands that were holding the paper were trembling. Right, Prime Minister, where did you get this information? Why didn't I know about it? Boromir suddenly raised his head and looked at Duan with a terrifying gaze. Your Majesty, this information was sent to my residence by a merchant who claimed to be from Laos. I only saw it when I returned to my residence. Duan naturally would not reveal that Yunk was in his residence. Who knew if the king would accuse him of colluding with the enemy in a fit of anger? Besides, he was counting on his relationship with Yunk to gain more benefits in the future. He had to hide this person well. A merchant from Laos? Boromir was not very satisfied with this answer. He wanted to ask why such a merchant did not look for him or any other officials, but the right Prime Minister. But before Boromir could ask, Duan took the initiative to explain, Your Majesty, my butler said that the Laos merchant will come looking for me again. But in my opinion, this is not important. What is important is whether the information is true or not. If it is, what should we do next? Right, according to the right Prime Minister, is this news true? Boromir seemed to have woken up the person in his dream. Boromir's voice carried a hint of urgency as he asked. In fact, it did not matter how the information came about. The most important thing was whether it was true or not. If it's true, it's a big mistake to send troops to the front. What's wrong? The other two allies have retreated. Do you want to fight head-on with the mercenaries with the Golden Border Dynasty's powerful army? In my opinion, regardless of whether it is true or not, there is no smoke without fire. We have to prepare for a backup plan. Duan raised his head. He wanted to say that since he was the one who sent the information, of course, he would believe it to be true. But he would not say that. He wanted the king to figure it out himself. At the same time, he wanted to use this as an excuse to trick some people, so he could not be too sure. Yes, it is necessary to prepare for a backup plan. Boromir kept nodding, but soon he shook his head. But we have to be careful. Someone might be deliberately spreading false information to mislead us. So, summon the left Prime Minister to the palace for a meeting. In the end, Boromir did not make a decision. He wanted to summon the others to listen to their opinions. When he heard that the king wanted to summon the left Prime Minister, Duan's eyes flashed with excitement. He knew the king too well. The king liked to listen to everyone's opinions, as if that was the best way to make the right choice. But he had forgotten that the truth was often in the hands of only a few people. The king summoned the left Prime Minister, Ding Ding Wei, in his official robe, appeared in the side hall. Ding Ding Wei was tall and slender. He looked to be in his 50s. His eyes were not big, but they were very spirited and gave people a feeling of wisdom. Your subject greets your majesty. When he entered the side hall, Ding Ding Wei bowed to the king according to the rules. Left Prime Minister, please rise. Come, bring this over. When Ding Ding Wei entered the hall, Boromir's expression had already returned to normal. He looked calm and relaxed. Obviously, he wanted to see the debate between the two prime ministers before making a decision. With the demeanor of a prime minister, Ding Ding Wei unhurriedly took the paper that the eunuch presented to him. First, he gave it a cursory glance. His eyes immediately widened. Then, he carefully read it twice. After that, he did not immediately speak. Instead, he slowly closed his eyes as if he was thinking about something. King Boromir was not in a hurry. He seemed to be used to the left prime minister's way of doing things. He sat there calmly and did not say anything. On the other side, Duan was also not in a hurry. This was a trap to begin with. He had even thought about what choice Ding Ding Wei would make. He was just waiting for him to jump in. After about 5 or 6 breaths, Ding Ding Wei finally opened his eyes. He cupped his fists and said to Boromir, Your Majesty, may I know where this information came from? Chapter 626. For the left prime minister to say this, it was clear that he did not believe that this was news from the army. He knew very well that regarding the movements of the other two countries, it would take at least the day after tomorrow for definite news to arrive. Now that it had arrived, it could only mean that this news did not come from official channels. The left prime minister is indeed amazing. This news didn't come from the military. It was sent by the right prime minister. Borimov seemed to be very satisfied with the left prime minister's performance and didn't forget to praise him. The right prime minister sent it. Ding Ding Wei laughed. Originally, he was suspicious of this news because they were enemies with the mercenaries. Of course, he had done his research on the strength of the mercenaries. In his opinion, although the mercenaries were powerful, their weakness was also very obvious. They were too few in number. They might be able to deal with any one country, but if it was 1 against 3, they wouldn't be able to do it. But now, the news said that the armies of Siam and Ava had sent out their troops and were defeated. It seemed too unreal. This was already suspicious. Now that he knew that the news came from the right prime minister, Ding Ding Wei instinctively thought that it was fake news. As for why this news came, it was very simple. It was because Dun wanted to prevent him from sending reinforcements to the front line. Because the two of them had different political views, once the reinforcements were sent, it meant that the other side had lost the battle. Oh. Why is the left prime minister laughing? No one knew what Borimov was thinking when he said this. But from his words, it was clear that he was a person who wasn't afraid of things getting out of hand. Your Majesty, please forgive me for being rude. Now, I would like to ask the right prime minister a few questions. Is that all right? Ding Ding Wei still smiled and asked Borimov for permission. I believe the right prime minister won't mind, right? Borimov nodded with a smile. This was equivalent to agreeing on behalf of Dun. Of course. The confident Dun nodded reservedly. Then, he looked at Ding Ding Wei and said, if the left prime minister has any questions, feel free to ask. I will answer truthfully. At this moment, Dun's expression was very calm. There was even a hint of confidence on his face. When Ding Ding Wei saw all of this, for some reason, his heart couldn't help but tremble. As an old rival, he knew all too well what kind of person Dun was. For the sake of fighting for power and profit, they would do anything. Such people were often willing to turn black into white. They could be said to have mastered the art of thick black. Because of this person had done too many things that made people feel guilty. It was difficult to describe him as confident. But now, he was actually so calm. Could it be that the information was true? As soon as this idea flashed through his mind, it was quickly rejected by Ding Ding Wei himself. If it was true, His Majesty would not have summoned him. Since His Majesty had called him here, it could only mean one thing. Even His Majesty was skeptical about this information. Once he and His Majesty both approved of this information, the matter of sending more troops to the front lines would be delayed indefinitely. This meant that the other party had won this battle, which also meant that the other party was stronger than him. When he thought of this, Ding Ding Wei threw the suspicion that had just arisen to the back of his mind. Right Prime Minister, may I ask where did you get this information? To be honest, left Prime Minister, this information was sent to my residence by a merchant who claimed to be from Laos. Duen, who was already prepared, replied calmly. Laos merchant. I wonder if right Prime Minister has seen him with your own eyes? When he heard that the source of the information was so childish, Ding Ding Wei was even more certain of his guess. This must be a smokescreen thrown out by Duen in order to win the battle of whether or not to send troops. Since he knew what was going on, he definitely couldn't let the other party succeed. No. Duen answered very straightforwardly. But he didn't forget to add, although I haven't seen him, I still believe this information. So according to my opinion, whether or not to send troops to Suwon City needs to be carefully considered. Ha ha ha. This answer finally made Ding Ding Wei unable to hold back his laughter. If it wasn't for the following explanation, perhaps he wouldn't be so certain. But since he took the initiative to mention the issue of sending troops, it was tantamount to revealing 300 taels of silver here. After being the left prime minister for so many years, Ding Dingwei believed that his ability to observe people's expressions had reached a very high level. Duan's words were tantamount to confirming his previous guess. Since he had already made his decision, Ding Dingwei didn't look at Duan anymore. Instead, he turned to Boromov and cupped his fists. "Your Majesty, in my opinion, this information can't be trusted. It's completely groundless. So I ask your Majesty to make a decision and allow us to send reinforcements to Suing City. When the time is right, we will go all out to counterattack and recover the lost land. This will raise the prestige of our country, as well as the prestige of our king." Ding Dingwei finally made his move. Duan, who had been waiting impatiently, also turned to Boromov and cupped his fists. "Your Majesty, I believe this information is true. It's the same as my previous guess. So I'm sure your Majesty will be cautious in sending troops. I can even guarantee with my official position that if this information isn't true, I'm willing to resign in 2 days and retire to my hometown." At this moment, Boromov and Ding Dingwei were shocked by Duan's words. This was a scene that they hadn't expected at all. Originally, after hearing Ding Dingwei's words, Boromov could basically confirm that this was a fake information that Duan had deliberately created to delay the sending of reinforcements. He was still a little angry about this. He could allow the two prime ministers to fight each other, but the prerequisite was that they couldn't disrupt the development of the country. Otherwise, he wouldn't hesitate to chop off their heads. But suddenly, Duan was so confident that he would use his authority as a stake. At this moment, Boromov hesitated. Boromov wasn't the only one who thought so. Left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei was also caught off guard by Duan's move. What's going on? It's just a plan to delay the arrival of reinforcements. Why did he make such a huge bet? Why did the right Prime Minister dare to make such a huge bet? What did he rely on? Ding Dingwei looked at Dun seriously, but he couldn't see anything from Dun's face. Especially at this moment, Dun intentionally closed his eyes. This made Ding Dingwei feel that he didn't know where to start and analyze. The side hall fell silent. Both the king and the left prime minister were shocked by Duan's bold words. They couldn't help but wonder if they were wrong. Duan opened his eyes and said, "If this information is true, not only should we stop sending reinforcements, but we should also find a way to negotiate with the mercenaries. The sooner we negotiate, the more sincere we will be and the less we will have to pay. On the other hand, when the situation is settled, we will have to pay several times the price if we want to negotiate with them." Duan's words couldn't be more apt to describe him now. Duan's words were completely for the sake of the Golden Border dynasty and had nothing to do with any power struggle. King Boromir was indeed frightened by Duan's boldness. He couldn't help but hesitate. But before he could say anything, left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei also opened his mouth and said in the same shocking tone, "I think this news is fake. Although the mercenaries are powerful, their military strength is limited. It is impossible for them to stop the armies of Siam and Ava at the same time. This is the right time to send reinforcements. I am also willing to guarantee that if I am wrong, I will retire and return to my hometown." Well, Tintin Wei had also put in a lot of effort. His words were so certain that Boromir was in a dilemma. Normally, such a thing wouldn't happen. The word official was always there. Real officials, especially important ministers, spoke with a sense of propriety. Even if they were more than 90% sure, they wouldn't be so certain. They would always leave a way out for themselves, right? But today, the two prime ministers had put their official positions on the line and their opinions were so different. This was so abnormal that it made Boromir even more hesitant. On the other hand, Duan was first surprised, then he was overjoyed. Someone had finally jumped into the pit. It was his old rival. He really wanted to shout out loud to vent his excitement. He was so excited in his heart, but on the surface, Duan still suppressed his excitement, cupped his fists and said to Ding Ding Wei, "Good, Lord Left Prime Minister, if that's the case, we might as well make a bet. We will see the result in 2 days. But I still have one thing to say. If we want to negotiate with the mercenaries then, we will have to pay a higher price. Let's make a bet. But I still support sending reinforcements. If we send reinforcements too late, we can't afford to suffer any losses at the front line," Ding Ding Wei said firmly. Then, he stopped looking at Duan and focused all his attention on King Boromir. Obviously, he was listening to the king's orders. The two prime ministers had put their official positions on the line and spoke with great confidence. This way, Boromir was the one who had a headache. This was different from what he had expected. He wanted to see which side was right and support. But now that both sides were so strong, how could he make a decision? Boromir wanted to put his hands into his hair to calm down, but he knew that if he did so, it would be very unbecoming of him as a king. But in front of the two prime ministers, he had to give an explanation. After thinking about it, he decided to continue mediating. If he couldn't make the decision, then he would let the facts make the decision. Alright, since the two prime ministers are so confident in their negotiations, why don't we all calm down and wait for a while? There should be news in 2 days. At that time, this king will know how to make a decision. Chapter 627. The king actually chose to wait, causing Ding Ding Wei's expression to change. "Your Majesty, you can't do that. This is exactly what some people are trying to do. If there are no reinforcements coming from the front, it will be a big problem. Your Majesty, what we should do now isn't to send reinforcements. Instead, we should immediately send a peace envoy to contact the mercenaries. This is the only way to resolve this matter with the smallest price. A long delay may lead to trouble." Duan also called out. He looked very anxious, but only he knew how happy he was. He had already dug a hole for Ding Ding Wei, now he just had to wait 2 days to see the results. As for whether the king would agree to the peace talks now, he wasn't the one who would suffer a loss. Since the king wasn't anxious, why should he be anxious? The two prime ministers seemed to have the intention to quarrel again. Boromir immediately felt a headache coming on. He couldn't help but say in a slightly angry tone, all right. It's just 2 days later. Nothing major will happen. This matter is settled. Don't say anything else." The king was angry. Whether it was Ding Ding Wei or Dun, they knew when to stop. They just glared at each other and left the palace after saluting. Not long after the two of them left, the whole story began to spread. First, some of the important ministers knew about this matter. Soon, the commoners on the streets were also very clear about it. King Boromir didn't say anything about it. He even knew that the two prime ministers must have deliberately spread the news in order to undermine each other. It was better for him to remain uninvolved in this matter. This way, he would be able to seize the initiative. Even the king was prepared to watch the show, and so were the officials and commoners. Soon, they formed 2 factions and began to have an intense discussion about who would win. The combat strength of the mercenaries naturally became the main topic of discussion. Those who supported Duan would naturally say that the mercenaries were powerful, and that they were omnipotent. Those who supported Ding Ding Wei would naturally say that no matter how powerful the mercenaries were, they were too few in number. It was absolutely impossible for them to win a war against the 3 countries. Duan's words were just to delay the reinforcements to support the front line. It was just to tear down the left prime minister's platform. This kind of action that sacrificed the interests of the country for one's own personal reputation was really too despicable. If it could be proven that Duan was lying 2 days later, then he should be charged with the crime of harming the country. The people who supported both sides were still having an intense debate. There was no victory or defeat, but the mercenaries' reputation had already penetrated deep into the hearts of the commoners. This was especially true for the people who had escaped from Shangding City. Some of them had come to the capital, and through their mouths, they had described the mercenaries as incomparably terrifying. In the end, the mercenaries' reputation had been greatly increased. This was something that even Yunk had not expected. However, this was good news after all. Yunk quickly ordered his subordinates to spread all kinds of news about the mercenaries. For example, the commoners in Vietnam and Laos were living very well. With Yang Bao, once they obtained citizenship, they wouldn't be bullied anymore. If this news was spread during normal times, not only would it not be accepted, but it would also be criticized as a misconception. However, at this time, when the news was spread, not only did it attract a lot of attention, but it also attracted a lot of attention. The two sides were fighting, and for a while, there was no clear winner. Everyone was watching the show, but there were also people who were very depressed. For example, General Hun Senator Hun Sen was still very strong. After losing Jujing City and becoming the general of the defeated army, he was escorted back to Golden Rim City. It was said that he was going to be punished. At this moment, his greedy behavior saved him. Because he was greedy for money, he became the child of wealth. As long as he had some influence in the imperial court and could speak, he would send people to give generous gifts to the officials. As a result, there were many people who spoke up for him. In the end, the left and right prime ministers spoke up together. The left prime minister Ding Ding Wei thought that at this time, although Hun Sen had some small problems, he could still fight. Moreover, killing a general before the war was not good for the morale of the army, so he spoke up for him. The right prime minister Duen was much simpler. He had received enough money, so he naturally stood up and said a few good words. The two prime ministers had the same opinion, which was a very rare thing. In the end, King Boromir decided to give Hun Sen a chance to perform meritorious deeds. He even gave him military power and told him to be prepared to support Su Wing City at any time. But now, the two prime ministers had different opinions and couldn't decide who was better. Instead, Hun Sen stopped supporting Su Wing City. He had no choice but to wait at home. But in his heart, he was cursing Duen. If it wasn't for the right prime minister, he would have been at the front line by now and could even turn the situation around to prove his ability. No matter how the atmosphere in the king's city changed, time didn't stop flowing because of this. It was still moving forward on schedule. After tonight, it would be 2 days tomorrow. It was time for the Golden Rim Dynasty's fast horse scouts to return. The results would be revealed tomorrow. Dwayne became a little nervous. After all, he didn't get the news through his own channels, so after thinking about it, he went to the backyard to look for Skylark because he couldn't sleep. At this time, Yun Kei was not asleep. He seemed to have known that Duan would come. He set up a simple tea shed in the small courtyard and specially prepared an extra chair. Mr. Yun knew that I would come. As soon as Duan appeared here and saw the furnishings, he was shocked. Hee, we will see the results tomorrow. Right Prime Minister, it is inevitable that you will be impatient. Come over and have a cup of tea to calm your mind. Yunk had a smile on his face as he casually pointed to the chair opposite him. Duen also wanted to hear Yun Kei say that there was no problem with the information, so he simply sat down. But just as he sat down, after hearing Yun Kei's next sentence, he suddenly jumped up. Yunk chuckled and said, "Actually, the previous news was just to tease right Prime Minister. The mercenaries at the front line need time to take down Suwon City. They were afraid that you would send reinforcements and disrupt the plans of the Duke of Loyalty, so they made this plan." After hearing these words, Duen was frightened. He couldn't help but jump up. Then he angrily stared at Yun Kei, who was still sitting there and fiddling with the tea, and said, "Mr. Yun, don't make jokes at this time. Otherwise, people will die." This so-called death naturally meant that he would call the guards and servants of the mansion to kill Yun Kei in a fit of anger. Because if all of this was true, he would become a tool in the hands of others. He would lose face and delay the important matters of the country. If that was really the case, he would become a sinner of the Golden Border dynasty. Duen was really angry. He even had an impulse to kill someone. Yun Kei acted as if he didn't hear anything. After finishing the last procedure of making tea, he raised his head and looked at the angry Duan and said, "Right, Prime Minister, of course I was joking." Huh? Duane's expression changed when he heard this. He didn't even know which sentence was true and which was false. "Ha ha ha, right, Prime Minister, isn't what I said just now what you suspected in your heart?" Yun Kei once again pointed to the chair opposite him, indicating that he could sit down. Then he casually said, "I just said what right Prime Minister was thinking. But this only represents what you think, not what I think. I still have the same words, the news is incomparably accurate. Otherwise, I wouldn't stay here and wait for the confrontation, right?" Yun Kei dared to stay in the mansion, which was already a clear proof. Unless he was playing a death game, otherwise, he wouldn't take such a risk. This sentence finally made Duan calm down a little. He sat down again. "Mr. Yun, is the news really true? You also know that the outside world is in chaos. If the news is not true, then this Prime Minister is really dead." "Of course it is true. I have already said this. Right, Prime Minister, have you thought about it? Once the news comes tomorrow that proves you are right, what should we do next?" Yun Kei was waiting for Duan's arrival, not to dispel the other party's worries, but to prepare for the next layout. Duan didn't know this. He was now thinking about the problem raised by Yun Quebec. He really didn't think about it. First, it was because he couldn't confirm the accuracy of the news. Second, he wanted to see left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei make a fool of himself. As for other things, he didn't have time to think about it. But since Yun Kei asked this question, he must have thought about it. This time, Duan asked with an attitude of asking for advice. "May I ask Mr. Yun, what should this Prime Minister do next?" "You don't have to do anything. Just say that you are sick because you were suspected this time and go back to the mansion to stay. Let the left Prime Minister and the others mess around outside. The higher they jump, the harder they will fall in the future. When the time is right, right Prime Minister will stand up and shout. That will be the best time to prove your ability." The smile on Yun Kei's face disappeared, replaced by a face of determination and decisiveness. Huh? Duan was also a very smart person. He immediately thought of something and said, "Mr. Yun means to first give up the right to negotiate, and when those people can't reach an agreement, this Prime Minister will help to decide the overall situation?" "Yes." Yun Kei nodded with satisfaction. He praised the other party for being a smart person. Duane chuckled after hearing Skylark's praise. But then he frowned and said, "But if someone else completes the negotiation with the mercenaries, then wouldn't this Prime Minister have nothing to do with it?" Chapter 628. They won't be able to negotiate. The Duke of Loyalty has already sent me a message. Unless the right Prime Minister personally comes, it's useless for anyone to negotiate. Skylark said this with an incomparably confident tone as he smiled and looked at Dun, who was sitting opposite him. "Oh. Haha, then I thank the Duke of Loyalty for your praise. Come, let me propose a toast to Mr. Yun. I wish us a happy cooperation." Dun laughed as his worries were swept away. However, he did not know that the reason Yang said so much to him and the reason why Yang Qindong wanted him to negotiate was because he wanted more benefits. As for what benefits he could get, he would know in the next few days. Dun left Yang's courtyard with satisfaction and went back to his room to sleep. When he opened his eyes again, the sky was already bright. While he was having breakfast, the butler suddenly came to report that the scouts he had sent to Ava and Siam had returned. They were now part of the royal palace. At the same time, they brought with them a huge piece of news, which was that the armies of the two countries had been defeated. They were mercilessly blocked outside the gates of Laos by the mercenaries, unable to enter at all. In other words, the information provided by Yang was extremely accurate. This time, Dun had made the right bet. Ha 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 ha. Listening to the information provided by the butler, Duane grinned widely. Everything was as Skylark had said. Now, he needed to rest according to the plan. Thus, he told the housekeeper, spread the news outside. Say that this prime minister has fallen ill due to mental exhaustion. It's not convenient for him to see any guests. The butler was puzzled. This time, his master had won. Shouldn't it be time for him to shine in the court? Why did he have to stay at home and not come out? However, he was only a butler and could not understand his master's thoughts. After seeing the stern look in Dun's eyes, he immediately agreed and left to spread the news. At this time, the palace was already in a mess. The scouts had just returned and brought news from the front lines. The Ava and Siam armies planned to surround Wei to rescue Zhao and attack Laos while it was empty had failed. Not only that, but the Siamese army had also suffered heavy losses. They had lost 3 rounds in a row, and their rations had been destroyed. As soon as Boromir heard the news, he knew that things were going south. Fortunately, he didn't send any reinforcements to the front lines, which meant that he didn't reveal his intention to fight to the death with the mercenaries. As such, there was still a chance for both sides to negotiate. Left Prime Minister Ding Dingwei stood there with his head lowered. There were many other officials standing in the hall. However, they all seemed to intentionally or unintentionally maintain a certain distance from him. It could be seen that this time, he had miscalculated and lost to Right Minister Duan. According to the previous agreement, he would have to give up the position of Prime Minister and retire. If that was the case, who would put a person without power and influence in their eyes? There was no need to talk about respect. As if sensing the questioning gazes of the crowd, Ding Dingwei clenched his teeth. He suddenly cupped his fists and bowed to Boromir. Your Majesty, this subject has lost. This subject will immediately resign as the left Prime Minister. 1 day later, this subject will pack up and leave the capital. What are you doing? Did this king allow you to leave? It was just a joke. How can you take it seriously? I don't think the right Prime Minister will take it seriously. Oh right, why isn't the right Prime Minister here? Boromir was having a headache over the current situation, and Ding Dingwei's resignation came. In such a chaotic situation, how could he agree to it? Since Boromir was the one who said that, even if Dwayne was here, he wouldn't be able to say anything, let alone when he wasn't here. When Boromir asked this question, everyone noticed that the right Prime Minister wasn't in the hall. Many of the officials started whispering to each other. Some of them even thought that the right Prime Minister was using this opportunity to raise his own status. Just wait, he will definitely appear in a moment, and then he will stand here with the attitude of a victor and judge the world. More than one person had the same thought. Just as they thought that Dwayne was going to make a grand entrance, a eunuch quietly walked up to Boromir and whispered something into his ear. Oh. Is there such a thing? Is the right Prime Minister really ill? Boromir turned his head after hearing the eunuch's words and asked with a look of surprise. When he received the news from the scouts, he wanted to give Duan some praise or even substantial benefits. After all, this time, Duan didn't immediately send reinforcements. This was equivalent to creating a buffer zone with the mercenaries. It was equivalent to saving the Golden Border dynasty and not pushing them into a hopeless situation. But he didn't expect that at such a critical time, Duan would fall ill. This was too much of a coincidence. At least, he didn't believe it. The eunuch we sent to bring him into the palace replied that the right Prime Minister's face was ugly. His whole body was trembling and he was lying in bed. It seems that he is really ill. But in order to find out the truth, we have sent the imperial physician to the right Prime Minister's residence. I think there will be news soon. The old eunuch replied respectfully. Good, inform this king as soon as there is news. Boromir nodded. This time, whether Duan was really ill or not, he wouldn't punish him. It was understandable. After all, wasn't it human nature for people to vent their grievances after being wronged? But this time, Boromir still underestimated Duan's determination. This was a person who could be ruthless to his enemies, but even more ruthless to himself. In order to make it seem like he was really sick, he actually asked the housekeeper to get some ice from the cellar. Then, he turned it into ice water and poured it on his body. In this way, he really caught a cold. His whole body was cold and he fell ill. The scout's return had confirmed that what Young said was true. Since that was the case, what harm was there in trusting him again? He just hoped that the next development would be as Young said. Otherwise, it would be a waste to get sick this time. The imperial physician came and found that Duan had indeed caught a cold. The imperial physician immediately prescribed medicine and then returned to the palace to report. What? He is really ill. After the old eunuch said the news, King Boromir was shocked. It seemed that the right prime minister was really under a lot of pressure this time. Of course, this was just a passing thought. After ordering the old eunuch to send the imperial physician to see the right prime minister, he put his thoughts on the court. He didn't make a decision just now because he had been waiting for the right prime minister to come. Since he couldn't come, the matter of the peace talks could only be handed over to someone else. Although it was someone else, there weren't many people who could really choose. How powerful was the mercenary army? The position of the person sent to negotiate was too low. How could he talk to them on equal terms? Wouldn't it be shameful if the person sent couldn't even see the face of the king? After thinking about it, Boromir still chose the left prime minister, Ding Ding Wei. The left prime minister also wanted to use this opportunity to repay the king's kindness. Of course, he didn't hesitate to agree. After only 2 hours, Ding Ding Wei, who had made some preparations, left Golden Rim City and went straight to Suing City. The reason why he was in such a hurry was naturally because he knew that speed was the most important thing in war. Now that the two allies had lost the war, if the Golden Rim dynasty didn't make a move, who knew if the other side would gather all the troops to attack the Golden Rim dynasty in anger? Once they made this decision, it would be even more difficult to negotiate with them. The carriage sped along the way. Who knew how many horses were changed on the road? Normally, it would take 5 or 6 days to reach Suing City, but Ding Ding Wei only took 3 days. As soon as he arrived, he sent people to the mercenary camp outside the city to express the Golden Rim dynasty's intention to negotiate and stop the war. At this moment, Suing City was already full of holes. These days, the mercenary army's cannons didn't stop firing. It was unknown when a powerful shell would fall, and every time it fell, it would cause a lot of damage in the city. It was normal for people to die and houses to be destroyed. For this reason, most of the people in the city had been evacuated, leaving only the soldiers. They didn't dare to leave without orders. They were on tenterhooks every day, fearing that the next shell would fall on their heads. General De En personally came out to meet Ding Ding Wei. As soon as they met, the general began to complain. He also said that he had made countless requests to the king's city, either to send reinforcements or to prepare for peace talks. Why didn't there a response until now, etc. Facing Dun's aggrieved face, Ding Ding Wei asked with a displeased face, "You generals are always thinking of asking His Majesty for help when something happens. Why didn't you try to fight the mercenaries? If you could win, would you still need to suffer these grievances?" Hey! Left Prime Minister, it's easy for you to say that. Hearing this, Dun was a little angry. He was the general of the dynasty and belonged to the existence of the military leader. There was no need to talk about his authority. Although Ding Ding Wei was the left prime minister, in reality, he wasn't much stronger than him. Not to mention, it was now a time of war, and the status of soldiers was greatly increased. How could he be afraid of the other party? Left Prime Minister, how could you not know that we didn't try to launch a counterattack? But the mercenaries have continuous fire guns that can take people's lives from hundreds of feet away. Our bows and arrows only have a range of 300 feet. How can we fight them? This general has ordered 2 attacks, but we didn't even see a single person and suffered heavy casualties. How can we fight such a battle? Left Prime Minister, please teach me. Of course, if Left Prime Minister is willing to personally lead the army, then I will give you a good set of armor. How about it? Asking a civil official to go to the battlefield to fight was clearly nonsense. How could Ding Dingwei answer? He coldly snorted and said, "Fine, since the army can't win, then let us civil officials negotiate with our mouths." Chapter 629. All right. De En nodded, as if this was how it should be. This scene infuriated Ding Dingwei greatly. In the past, when there was a war, it was always the generals who were in charge of the war, and the civil officials who were in charge of the peace. But now, as soon as Dagon heard that they were going to negotiate, he agreed without hesitation. From this, it could be seen that they were really outnumbered by the mercenaries. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that this time's negotiation wouldn't go smoothly? Now, he just hoped that the other party would not ask for too much. Ding Dingwei was destined to be disappointed. Although the mercenaries quickly gave an answer and welcomed them to the peace talks, when Ding Dingwei went to the mercenary camp the next day, he didn't see the famous Duke of Loyalty from the Great Ming Dynasty, but only 2 regimental political commissars. He knew that the peace talks this time wouldn't go so smoothly. He couldn't even see the main characters, which was a bad sign. The people who met Ding Dingwei were the political commissar of the 2nd Regiment, Kong Jia, and the political commissar of the 3rd Regiment, Chen Bo. This was also Yang Chendong's intention to train these people's political skills. Of course, the 2 of them were prepared when they came. That was, Chen Bo would play the good cop, and Kong Jia would play the bad cop. When the red and white figures first met with Ding Dingwei, they opened their mouths wide and proposed conditions that Ding Dingwei could not accept. According to the 2 political commissars, the war could be stopped, but the Phnom Penh dynasty had to submit to the Duke of Loyalty. At the same time, the entire Phnom Penh dynasty had to be divided into provinces like Vietnam and Laos. King Boromir had to leave the palace and be taken to a mysterious place according to the mercenaries. He would be put under house arrest for the rest of his life. The other ministers would have to hand over half of their property to protect themselves and so on. These were completely overbearing terms. One could imagine how dark Ding Dingwei's face would be when he heard this. Then, he laughed out of anger. "What's the difference between your demands and occupying the Phnom Penh dynasty by force?" "Of course there is. If we were to attack, a minister like you wouldn't be able to save your life just by handing over half of your wealth." Chen Bo, who was in charge of playing the bad guy, said without hesitation. Are you so confident that you can take down our gilded border dynasty? Don't you know that even a rabbit will bite when it's cornered? When we are both injured, Siam and Awa will join forces to attack. I'm afraid you will have to pay a heavy price. Ding Dingwei said in a threatening tone. He didn't believe that the mercenaries would be so bold as to not care about other countries. If that was the case, they wouldn't have just surrounded Suwon City. They would have directly attacked it. At this point, Chen Bo suddenly thought of something and said, "Oh right, the reason why you came here must be because you heard the news that we defeated the Siamese and Ava army. Yes, if you were willing to negotiate before this, we would still be able to do so. But now, either you surrender or wait for my mercenaries to blast your heart with their guns." Is this the opinion of the loyal Duke? After feeling Chen Bo's tough attitude, Ding Dingwei knew that there would be no result if he continued to talk to this person, so he wanted to see the higher-ups. Perhaps it was easy to meet the King of Hell, but difficult to deal with the little demons. This is not the opinion of the loyal Duke, but the opinion of most of our military generals. Chen Bo turned his head and said with a very arrogant look. Just like that, the first meeting ended without any results. Just as Ding Dingwei returned to Suwon City with a belly full of anger, a few cannonballs suddenly flew over his head. One of them even landed not far from his team. He didn't know if it was a random shot or if it was done on purpose to give him a show of strength. The bombardment continued. There was no fixed time, no fixed location, and no fixed number of shells. It seemed that everything depended on the mood of the mercenaries. When he was in a good mood, he would only fire once every half a day. When he was in a bad mood, he would fire a few times, causing the people in the city to panic. Even the morale in the barracks was declining day by day. If General Dagon had not sent an inspection team to keep watch at the rear, there would have been many deserters. The atmosphere in the city became more and more serious, and the pressure on Ding Ding Wei also increased. He went to the mercenary camp for 3 days in a row. One of the negotiators, Chen Bo, didn't treat him well. Although there was another negotiator, Kong Jia, who constantly adjusted the atmosphere in the middle, the negotiations didn't break down. The content didn't change much. Ding Ding Wei had no choice but to write the situation in a memorial and send it back to the capital, Phnom Penh City. When the news reached the capital, King Boromir couldn't sit still. If the mercenaries were determined to take down Phnom Penh like how they took down Jiaoji and Lansong, then what could they use to stop them? Yes, they still had an army of more than 300,000 soldiers. If they fought, they would be able to cause a certain amount of damage to the mercenaries, or even severely injure them. This gave the two allied countries a chance to fight back. But in this way, Phnom Penh was destined to be turned into a sieve, or even destroyed. In this case, what benefits did it have to do with them? What should they do? Boromir, who was cursing Siam and Awa in his heart, could only think of a solution. Fortunately, there was good news at this time. The old eunuch beside him said that the right Prime Minister, Dun, had recovered. Although he wasn't as healthy as before, as long as he didn't do strenuous exercise, he wouldn't have any problems doing ordinary work. Quick, summon the right Prime Minister. When he heard the news, Boromir was like a person walking in the darkness who saw the light of dawn, and he shouted excitedly. Dun's illness was indeed cured. It was originally a self-inflicted cold. Because it was treated in time, it looked more serious 2 days ago. Now, he had been recuperating for more than a week. Naturally, he was fine. Of course, Dun was able to recover so quickly thanks to Yun Kei's help. Mr. Yun said that it was time for him to come back, and it was also time for him to make a contribution. With the left Prime Minister, Ding Ding Wei, it would be very advantageous for Dun to take over the negotiations, especially in terms of conditions. The facts had proven that Yun Kei's words could be trusted. Of course, Dun had to stand up. At this time, he could be said to be in high spirits. Even when he followed the eunuch into the palace, he was still arrogant and confident. As Yun Kei said, the left Prime Minister hit a wall in the front line. The king didn't really want to fight with the mercenaries, and the negotiation force would become the mainstream. Naturally, it was time for him to perform. Because Yun Kei said that in the entire Golden Border dynasty, only he could handle the negotiation. Of course, in return, this time, he had to fight for a certain amount of rights for the mercenaries. For this reason, Dun basically agreed without hesitation. Perhaps others would think that he was betraying his country's rights, but only he knew that if he didn't, there would be someone else to take over this position. Not to mention, if he could protect the Golden Border dynasty at this time, it would be a great achievement. Not to mention, he could also attack the left Prime Minister, Ding Ding Wei. This had always been his wish. Since he could make His Majesty happy, make the mercenaries happy, and make himself happy, why not do such a thing? Dun walked into the side hall and saw King Boromir sitting high above. He saw that the king's eyes lit up, and then his face was full of smiles. Ha, the right Prime Minister is here. This king's heart is at ease. Come, give the Prime Minister a seat. Giving a seat was a very high courtesy, and something like this had never happened before. Just this action alone could prove a lot of things. At this time, Dun's heart was at ease. After more than 2 hours, Dun walked out of the palace with a satisfied face. Boromir had approved that he would replace the left Prime Minister, Ding Ding Wei, to negotiate with the mercenaries in Su Wang. Not only that, the king even told Dun the bottom line. As long as he followed the bottom line, he would have more freedom to play. Early the next morning, Dun set off from Golden Border City and went straight to Su Wang City. The Foreign Affairs Director of the Security Bureau, Yun Kei, was also with the convoy. With Dun's departure to the front line, his task was equivalent to more than 80% completed. The next step was to finalize some of the details of the negotiation. In fact, after Dun returned to his residence yesterday, he had an in-depth communication with Yun Kei about the negotiation. In this regard, Yun Kei had already been authorized by Yang Qindong, and his decision was the mercenaries' decision. Finally, after a sincere communication, the final plan of the negotiation was finalized. That was, the Golden Border dynasty made the following concessions. First, General Hun Sen publicly apologized to the Salangan family of Laos and compensated them with a total of 300,000 silver taels. In fact, the Salangan family's loss was only 170,000 silver taels. Second, the Golden Border dynasty would compensate the mercenaries with 1.5 million silver taels, which would be used as military funds for the mercenaries, and 500,000 tons of copper and iron. Third, cede Shangding City and all the territories north of the city to Laos. The mercenaries would withdraw to the north of Shangding City and would not infringe on the interests of the Golden Border dynasty without any reason. Fourth, the two sides would exchange business, each had its own independent sovereignty, and could station diplomatic missions to ensure a friendly relationship for generations. Once one side was attacked by others for no reason, the other side was obliged to send troops to help. That was to say, after these events, the Golden Border dynasty and Laos had formed a military alliance. Of course, the agreement was written that once a war broke out, the troops would be sent, but the number would depend on the mood. There was no specific number. In a way, it was not a breach of the contract to send only one person. Chapter 630. The above was the general content of the negotiation. Although there were some other details, they were all carried out around these four major points. The agreement was reached 3 days after Right Ding Dun arrived at Su Weng Cheng. When the news was sent back to Phnom Penh City, King Boromir heaved a sigh of relief. Although they suffered a lot of losses, they managed to stop the mercenary army. In a way, this was the first time a country or region managed to stop the mercenary army. Boromir was very proud of this. Of course, because of Boromir's compromise, it attracted the dissatisfaction of Siam and Ava. But in this regard, Phnom Penh dynasty did not say anything. Who asked these two countries to withdraw their troops so early? They even wanted to laugh at Phnom Penh dynasty. After this incident, Phnom Penh dynasty also saw their own shortcomings. No matter who had it, it was better to have it themselves. No matter who was strong, they were not as strong as themselves. They decided to put all their efforts into developing their military. Recruiting, training, and training soldiers had become something they urgently needed to do. Previously, because they had compensated the mercenaries, now they needed more money to train their soldiers. All of a sudden, all kinds of taxes began to increase, and some even doubled. In some places, the taxes were collected 3 years later, or even 5 years later. Because of this, the people were complaining, and the order of the country began to fall into chaos. The matter of Phnom Penh dynasty was finally resolved temporarily. The mercenary army also began to withdraw. When the news was sent back to Vientiane City, the capital of Laos, many people were shocked. In the eyes of the nobles, this time the mercenary army and the Phnom Penh army would definitely suffer losses. In this way, their opportunity had appeared. When the time came, once Siam and Ava sent troops again, Laos would definitely not want to be trapped internally and externally. Their status would rise, and their authority would increase. Wouldn't this bring them benefits? But now, the mercenary army had stopped. Were they still the powerful mercenary army that destroyed a country? If this was the case, where would their development opportunity lie? More importantly, this time, the mercenaries had stood up for the Salangans. Naturally, they would receive the support of the domestic business groups. Their position would be more stable. Would they have a chance to rise again? In the eyes of the merchants and commoners, the conclusion that they came to was completely different from the nobles. The mercenaries had won the battle, and for the first time, the enemy general had apologized to the merchants on their side. This was something that seemed impossible to happen. Didn't this mean that the mercenaries' position had been recognized and respected by everyone? As the governor of Lao province, Yuan Shaoqian had said that as long as you became a legal citizen of Lao province, no matter where you were, no matter what happened, as long as you encountered any difficulties or injustice, the provincial government would stand up for you, solving the difficulties and finding justice at the same time. Naturally, many people scoffed at this. Most of them were merchants. They were not as ignorant as ordinary people. They had traveled extensively for many years and had been to countless places. Naturally, their horizons were not something that ordinary people could compare to. It was precisely because they had seen too many things that they did not believe that anyone could make decisions for them. Although they were very rich, their social status was not high. In the eyes of others, they were full of the stench of money. When it came to the degree of real respect, they were often inferior to some ordinary people. Soldiers, farmers, workers, and merchants. Merchants were ranked last. The general trend was like this. Why should they believe that the Lao provincial government would really protect their rights? Although they had paid a lot of business taxes. Now, no one dared to say such a thing. What happened to the Solingans had proven everything. Not only did General Hun Sen of the Phnom Penh dynasty personally apologize and pay compensation, but he also invited the Solingans to do business in the Phnom Penh dynasty. They bowed their heads, paid compensation, and even took the initiative to invite them. Did this not prove the status of merchants? As the patriarch of the Solingans, Nong Si was very proud of himself. He was actively preparing goods to go to the Phnom Penh dynasty in person. After all, with the mercenaries as their backing, it could be imagined that the Phnom Penh dynasty would never dare to play any tricks. Did they really want to fight another war and pay compensation again? Sua Langan was not the only merchant family in Laos. There were many other businesses that were not weaker than them, and some were even stronger than them. They all saw the opportunity and began to contact Governor Yuan, creating all kinds of opportunities to get along and meet. Some of the big families even found the youngest and most beautiful girls in their families and gave them to Yuan Shaoqian as concubines in order to strengthen the relationship between the two sides. After Yang Qindong heard about this matter, he even gave instructions that if Yuan Shaoqian was willing, he could marry a few high-quality foreign women as concubines. Because he did not forget the expectations Yuan Shaoqi and Zhou Hua had for this son when he left Crimson City. One of the most important things was the important matter of marrying a wife and having children. Even Yuan Xiaoyu had mentioned it twice in front of him for the first time, showing the importance the Yuan family placed on this matter. Of course, according to Yang Qindong's intentions, he could take a woman from another race as a concubine, but it was impossible for him to take her as a wife. It had to be a Han woman in order to ensure the purity of his bloodline. He did not want the country that his generation had worked so hard to build to be swallowed up by their children with foreign bloodline. In fact, not only did Yang Qindong have such requirements for Yuan Shaoqian, but also for all the senior cadres and senior officers. When you reach a certain age, you can marry a high-quality woman from outside the clan as your concubine, but you absolutely cannot let her become your wife. If anyone dares to do so and is found out, then I'm sorry, but everything you have now will become zero. You will also be removed from the cadre and become an ordinary citizen, vanishing into the crowd. Since Yang Qindong had spoken, the business groups paid more attention to this matter. Yuan Shaoqian also had an extra job, which was to go back and forth between the various big families after work. It was to get closer to them, and at the same time, to arrange blind dates. Not to mention, there was really a lucky woman that he took a fancy to and married as a concubine. With the previous example, the other merchant families were even more enthusiastic about this matter. Invitations for Yuan Shaoqian to attend banquets were placed all over the office desk. The reason why the merchants were so crazy was naturally because of the benefits. Compared to the ordinary people, their gratitude was much purer. This was especially so when Yang Bao published a series of punishments for this matter, using the World Knowledge Teahouse to make it known to everyone. Regardless of whether it was the elderly of 70 years old or the children of 3 years old, they all knew about this matter. They knew that as citizens of Lao province, they had more security when they went out, and they could receive the respect of others from the bottom of their hearts. This was something that they did not even dare to think about before. Lao province had led them to do it. In order to express their gratitude, the ordinary people could only lower their heads and work hard. Those of suitable age naturally chose to join the military to ensure that the fruits of their labor would not be stolen by others. They were just this kind of people. If someone treated them well, they would treat that person well. This was the will of the people. After this matter, the hearts of the people started to submit. After Wan Shaoqian gave out the various government orders, they were always quickly implemented and Lao province entered a period of rapid development. When Yang Qindong brought the main force of the mercenaries back to Wanxiang City, he saw this scene of prosperity, which made him very happy. In order to create enough space and environment for Lao province and Vietnam province to develop, he also sent messengers to Siam and Ava to discuss cooperation. There were no eternal enemies, only eternal benefits. Business alliances could strengthen each other. Since this was the case, why did they have to fight? Even the powerful mercenaries were willing to put down their weapons, they naturally went with the flow and agreed to a temporary peace. However, everyone knew that there would be a war between them sooner or later. Now was the time to develop and strengthen themselves. After dealing with the external threats, there was no problem with the internal integration. At this time, Yang Qindong was also about to leave Lao province. The Security Bureau was now sending a telegram every day, reporting the situation between Northern Ming and Walla. There had already begun a small-scale skirmish between the armies. If it continued to develop like this and there was no one to control it, it was likely that the war would be unstoppable. Since this was the case, Yang Qindong would definitely want to take a share of the profits. In addition, because their foundation was not strong enough, Lao province could not meet the requirements for expansion in a short period of time. There was no point in staying here, so his departure was inevitable. Yang Qindong decided to leave. The first to leave was the main force led by Commander Leng Song. Qiqian City could not be without a strong military force, so someone had to go back and defend it. After they left, the sixth young master also decided on the people he would bring with him when he left. It was Leng Feng Wuxing's 3rd Regiment, as well as 6 auxiliary battalions who had experienced hundreds of battles and already possessed decent battle strength. As long as they were trained a little more, they would definitely become the Leng Feng in the future. The ones left behind were Luo Po's 2nd Regiment, which was responsible for the security of Lao province and Vietnam. Yang Qindong had basically agreed to expand Luo Po's 2nd Regiment into the 2nd Division of the Leng Feng. The selection and assessment of personnel had to be carried out in Qiqian City. He could not be careless about the background check. The Leng Feng was his most elite force, so there would definitely be a situation that he could not control. If that was the case, he would rather not expand. Chapter 631. Luo Pa naturally agreed with this point. He fully supported the 6th young master's suggestion and expressed that there was no need to rush the expansion. He would do it steadily and make sure that every cold front that came would be a cold front. The strength of the elites would not decrease, but would only increase. Yang Qindong was not worried about Luo Pa. This person was able to stand out from the other officers and become the next regiment commander after Leng Song. Now that he had the qualifications, no one would say anything about him becoming the 2nd Division commander. After arranging this matter, it was time to leave. Before leaving, Yang Qindong had a long talk with Wan Shaoqian. He put forward some very useful suggestions for the future development of Laos. After that, he waved his hand and left Vientiane with nearly 4,000 mercenaries. He went to Yunnan province by land and met with Song Zhe, the governor of Yunnan province. After giving Song Zhe his approval and support, he boarded the ship at the harbor outside Sui City in Yunnan province and headed north along the sea. After nearly a year, Yang Qindong finally returned to the north of Great Ming Dynasty after stirring up trouble in the south. Overall, this trip to the south had been very fruitful. Invited by the southern Ming dynasty, he first quelled the rebellion of the Yellow Bandits, then destroyed Jiaoxi and Lancang, and established two provinces, Vietnam and Laos. He dealt a big blow to the Phnom Penh dynasty, flexed his muscles, and obtained a period of peace. Finally, he was going to return to the north. Standing on the deck of the naval warship, Yang Qindong looked ahead and planned every step in his heart. This time, he did not intend to enter Baiming's capital, Beiping City, when he returned to the north. His current identity was a little too sensitive. If he were to return now, it was very likely that it would cause unrest in the imperial court of the northern Ming dynasty. It was even possible that they would develop a strong sense of fear and give up on the battle with Wala. This was not the result he wanted. When he went to the south before, it was because he could not see any hope of expansion in the north. But even if the south was temporarily unable to expand, how could he possibly step in to stop a war that was about to break out in the north? The more intense the fight, the more he could fish in troubled waters and unknowingly develop and strengthen himself. Besides, the environment in the north this time was much better than the one in the south. When he went to the south, he was really in the dark and had to take things one step at a time. But now that he was in the north, he at least had a certain foundation. For example, the company commander of the Windchaser cavalry that he had sent to the grasslands 2 years ago had grown to a certain scale after a period of growth. Even in Baiming's Nuergendusi region, he had become a top figure. This time, Yang Qindong wanted to meet up with Windchaser. Presumably, with his support and participation, Windchaser's team would expand in a very short period of time and become a powerful force to enter the northern grasslands. The military ship headed north. The speed of the ship, which had been converted to steam power, was much faster. In just 5 days, they had traveled thousands of kilometers through the Korean Strait and arrived at a place called Haisheng. Haisheng was Vladivostok, which was occupied by Russia in the future. To the north was the Shuangqian Guards and to the south was the Malian Guards. It belonged to the Great Ming's Nuergendusi. The Nuergendusi was a local military organization set up by the Great Ming government in Heilongjiang, Asu River, today's Wasuli River, Songhua River, and Nayan River, today's Nan River. During Hongwu's reign, most of the Yuan dynasty officials in the Nuergendusi region surrendered to the Ming government. In the 9th year of Yongle, 1411, the Nuergendusi was officially set up. It was the highest administrative organization in Heilongjiang and Wasuli River. The main officials of the Gendusi were transferred officials and later became hereditary officials. The Mongols, Jurchens, Jalimi, Qi, Dor, and other races all made a living by hunting and fishing. The Ming dynasty government also appointed the leaders of the various races to take charge of the various places and gave them seals. They followed their customs and gave them tributes from time to time. The tributes included gerfalcon, mink fur, horses, and other local products, which was similar to the inland taxes. The Nuergendusi was set up in Nuergendusi on the east bank of the Heilongjiang River. It was roughly 200 kilometers away from the Heilongjiang mouth. The officials and troops that were sent to the Nuergendusi were all here. There were over 400 guards and troops stationed there. The area was east of the sea, northeast included Sakhalin Island, west of the Wonan River, Yinan River, south of the Tumun River, and north of the Qing and mountains. It could be said that this was a place where good and bad mixed together. Because of the diversity of the ethnic groups, it was very difficult to manage this place. There were even some areas that were constantly in war. Various ethnic groups and even some ambitious people wanted to expand their own forces here. In such a natural environment, Zhuge Feng continued to develop and grow. When he first came here under Yang Qindong's orders, he was only a squad leader. Including himself, he only had 10 brothers. After such a long time, his team continued to grow, and now it had the scale of a regiment, with 3 battalions and a regiment under its command. Zhuge Feng had also been given the position of regiment commander. "Ha, you became a regiment commander just like that? I hope you won't disappoint me." With a smile on his face, Yang Qindong thought of the matter mentioned in the Security Bureau report. The warship docked at the sea town. Before it reached the shore, it could see a black mass of cavalry approaching. From afar, there were at least 1,000 people. Prepare for battle. The third leader, Wu Sheng, shouted out reflexively. The 500 to 600 Leng Feng members and the guards on the ship quickly took out their guns and looked for a suitable position, adjusting the angle of the muzzle. It's fine. Yang Qindong was very satisfied with the performance of the Leng Feng. Then, he waved his hand nonchalantly and looked ahead. This shouldn't be an enemy. As if to prove this statement, as soon as the voice fell, a large 5-starred red flag appeared in the middle of the cavalry. Naturally, the cold vanguard soldiers were no stranger to this flag. When they were on the sea with the navy, they often used this flag. 3rd Regiment Commander, take a company of soldiers and check it out. Be careful. After Wu Sheng saw the red flag, he put away his gun, but his eyes were still cautious. Who knows if the enemy stole a 5-starred red flag to confuse him? After the 3rd Regiment Commander Chang Chunyang received the order, he took a company of Leng Feng to the shore and approached the cavalry. Through the binoculars, he saw that they said something, and then a small group of cavalry followed behind Chang Chunyang and approached the shore. Ha ha ha! With the existence of that qi in his heart, Yang Qindong's eyesight had reached an unimaginable level. When he was still 100 meters away, he laughed heartily. He had already recognized that the leader of the cavalry was Zhui Feng. It was indeed Zhui Feng's cavalry regiment. He came to Sea Town first after receiving the information from the security bureau. Not only that, but he also made the decision to ask the people here to leave. He even sent a military officer to patrol the surrounding 20 miles. In his opinion, the 6th young master's arrival should be a secret. He probably didn't want more people to know about it, so naturally, this matter couldn't be leaked. After asking the people nearby to leave, Zhui Feng began to wait for the 6th young master to appear. In his heart, the 6th young master was his life's benefactor. In the past, he didn't have enough to eat or wear. He didn't even know where he would live the next day, whether he could still fill his stomach, or whether he could still persevere and survive. But after meeting Yang Qindong, everything changed. Not only did he not have to worry about eating and wearing clothes, he also learned how to read and read. He knew that people didn't only live to fill their stomachs, but also to have more pursuits. Ever since he was born, he had been raising horses for those old masters. Zhui Feng's greatest pursuit in life was to have his own home one day, to be able to shelter him from the wind and rain, to have his own wife and children, to complete the family line, and to have a horse that belonged to him. It didn't have to be tall and handsome, but he would definitely take good care of it. Every day, he would use water to wash the horse very clean. Occasionally, when he had nothing to do, he could ride the horse for a walk. That was already very happy. But these thoughts could only be wishes, and he could only think about them in his heart. If he didn't even have enough to eat, how could he talk about raising his wife and children? And all of this changed because of Yang Qindong. All of his wishes were quickly realized. Following this, Zhui Feng's life ideals also changed. It turned out that he could also create some achievements. Not only did he bring glory to his ancestors, he didn't even know who his parents were. But at least he could let his children have a better life in the future, and not have to worry about food and clothing. Under Yang Qindong's guidance, he was fortunate enough to become Zhui Feng of the Cold Front, and his life changed. Because he knew horses and was good at training them, and his military skills were good, he finally became the squad leader of the Cold Front. He was sent to the north, where most of the terrain was plains. This completely changed his life, and gave him the space to display his talents. Today, he was no longer a youth who had to worry about his stuttering. He was already the commander of an army that commanded more than 1,000 people. But no matter what his identity had changed, when he knew that the 6th young master was coming, he was still very excited. At this moment, he followed behind the Spring Sun Camp commander, and his heart beat a lot faster. He didn't even know what to say when he saw the 6th young master. Before the situation became clear, the warship only threw down a plank to disembark, and didn't completely reach the shore. Zhui Feng walked up the plank to the deck of the warship, and stood in front of Yang Qindong. "Greetings, sixth young master." Almost instinctively, Zhui Feng stood at attention and saluted, showing a sense of competence. Chapter 632. Not bad. It's a bit darker, but it looks more sturdy. Raising his right hand, Yang Qindong smashed Zhui Feng's right chest. This had become Yang Qindong's signature move. Even though everyone who was hit would feel a burning pain in their chest, no one complained about it. Because they knew that this was the sixth young master's way of showing intimacy with them. What, other people didn't even have the right to be hit like this? Zhui Feng, who was praised, chuckled and revealed a silly smile. Then he thought of something and turned around to introduce the people behind him. "Sixth young master, this is 1st Battalion Commander Deng Yu, 2nd Battalion Commander Gao Danhua and 3rd Battalion Commander Ma Xiangshan." Deng Yu and Gao Danhua were originally soldiers of Cold Front. The sixth young master definitely has an impression of them. It's just that this Ma Xiangshan joined later. However, this person's horsemanship is extremely good and his riding skills are also very good. He is also very good at commanding troops in battle, so he was promoted to the position of 3rd Battalion Commander. Of course, the appointment of the 3 battalion commanders still needs to be approved by the 6th young master, the military, and the political department. Zhui Feng had indeed been trained. At least he knew that there were things that he couldn't decide. He needed to request approval from his superiors. Not bad. Deng Yu and Gao Danhua, your performance was also very good. As for your appointment, I can give you an answer now. It's approved. Yang Qindong had a smile on his face. These 3 people were the first 10 people to be sent here. Their backgrounds had already been investigated when they were in Crimson City. There would not be any problems, so he could directly appoint them. As for this Ma Xiangshan, he didn't know him. So he still had to follow the procedures. He couldn't casually make an exception. Deng Yu and Gao Danhua, who were called out, were naturally excited. This was an appointment approved by the 6th young master. Their identities and positions were stable. Ma Xiangshan, who wasn't called out, had an ugly expression. Then he made a shocking move. 6th young master, I want to challenge you to a duel on horseback. Do you dare? The words were shouted by Ma Xiangshan. Perhaps it was because he felt wronged and wanted to vent. However, he pointed the spearhead at Yang Qindong, which was something that no one could tolerate. How dare you? Kneel and accept your fate. Take him down. More than one person shouted. Then, one person after another jumped out. Among them were the officers of the 3rd Regiment of the 1st Division, as well as the captains and members of the 1st and 2nd Guard squads. Even Hu Mang couldn't help but shout at this moment. Then, he wanted to take down this arrogant person. But before he could make a move, Beta Persei had already taken a step forward and threw a punch forward. Beta Persei was the eldest of the 5 Yang family members, and his position and power were second only to Tiger's man. His mission was to ensure the absolute safety of the 6th young master. Now that someone dared to speak rudely in front of him, he wouldn't be polite and threw a punch forward. The punch was so fast that many people didn't see what happened. The punch had already broken through the air and arrived in front of Ma Xiangshan. Unlike the others, when Ma Xiangshan shouted that sentence, he thought of all kinds of possibilities, so he was prepared. Because of this, when Beta Persei's punch came, he quickly dodged to the side. Then, with his agility, he really dodged the punch. Beta Persei wasn't surprised that his punch missed. If a person who dared to shout in front of the young master didn't have any strength, he would look down on him. But it didn't matter that he dodged the punch. He suddenly swung his right arm to the right, and the punch turned into a swing punch. The momentum was so fast and fierce that even Ma Xiangshan didn't expect it. Bang! After the punch, Ma Xiangshan flew out and flew to the deck 3 meters away. He fell to the ground with a bang. Just from the way he landed on the ground, one could tell how powerful that punch was. Take him down. Tiger's mane quickly responded. With the order, a team of guards, Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu, grabbed Ma Xiangshan, who fell to the ground, and then stood him up. They looked at him with a murderous look. It seemed that as long as the sixth young master gave the order, the two of them would chop him up and throw him into the sea to feed the fish. Ma Xiangshan, who was restrained, first took a deep breath. After feeling the pain in his chest and not leaving any internal injuries, his eyes fell on Yang Qindong. He then said with a provocative look, "What? You don't dare. You really don't know how to write the word death." Tiger's mane saw Ma Xiangshan provoking the young master again and again. He was already furious and threw a punch at Ma Xiangshan's lower abdomen. Bang! Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu held Ma Xiangshan tightly. The punch was solid. Ma Xiangshan's body shrank into a ball. He opened his mouth and breathed heavily. Obviously, the punch was so heavy that he couldn't speak. Windchaser, Deng Yu, and Gao Danhua, who were standing opposite, were so scared that they couldn't speak. Usually, Ma Xiangshan was very low-key and didn't talk much. He was very calm. How could he become so easily angered at this moment? He actually challenged the authority of the sixth young master again and again. Did he really want to die? Among the three, Windchaser was the most difficult. He naturally respected the sixth young master, but at the same time, he also appreciated Ma Xiangshan. He was a native here. Not only was he familiar with the terrain and environment, but he also had Zhang Yuqi to command the battle. Every time, he would lead the charge. It could be said that he was both a brave and a wise general. Such a person was rare. Even Deng Yu and Gao Danhua couldn't compare to him. And now, this person destroyed his own future just because he challenged the sixth young master. He felt that it was a pity. Of course, he didn't dare to say anything. He was very clear about his identity. He also knew that the authority of the sixth young master wasn't something that others could casually question. No one spoke. On the deck, there was only the sound of Ma Xiangshan constantly retching and Ling Feng glaring at him with murderous gazes. Perhaps in some people's eyes, Ma Xiangshan was already a dead man. They were only waiting for the sixth young master to give the order and hand him over to them. Then, they would use all kinds of methods to make this person regret having a tongue and regret being able to speak. "You want to challenge me?" While everyone was waiting, Yang Qindong finally spoke. But it wasn't a condemnation. It was a question. Ma Xiangshan's physique was really good. Even though he was punched 3 times, the pain still persisted. It wouldn't go away for a few days, but he had already recovered his basic ability to speak. With the lesson just now, he didn't dare to challenge Yang Qindong. Fortunately, he had already achieved his goal, so he nodded after hearing this question. "Well, you are very courageous. Since it's like this, I will agree. How about this, seeing that you're injured, I'll give you 3 days to recuperate. After 3 days, we'll see who's the winner." Yang Qindong nodded lightly and actually agreed to the other party's challenge. This result naturally surprised everyone. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei bluntly said, "Young master, you have a body of gold. How can you take such a risk?" "Yes, sixth young master, Ma Xiangshan must have taken the wrong medicine. Don't take his words to heart." Windchaser and the others also quickly persuaded. "Well, I have made up my mind. It's settled. By the way, in these 3 days, no one is allowed to find trouble with Ma Xiangshan. This young master wants a fair competition. Is that clear?" "Clear." Tiger's Mane and the others said reluctantly. But there was no other way. In their eyes, Yang Qindong's words were an imperial edict. No one dared to disobey. Ma Xiangshan was the first to get off the boat. He really needed to heal. The 3 punches just now were heavier than the previous one. It had seriously affected his movements. When Ma Xiangshan left, Windchaser immediately knelt down and asked for forgiveness. Sixth young master, it's all my fault for not teaching him well. Please punish me. That's right. Your soldiers are indeed too arrogant. That's not good. I'll punish you with half a year's salary and find a good horse for this young master. That shouldn't be a problem, right? Yang Qindong naturally didn't like to see subordinates offending their superiors. But Ma Xiangshan's matter was an exception. He had just arrived and only a few people in this cavalry regiment were familiar with him. The others were probably not familiar with him. If he wanted to lead them, it would be very difficult if he didn't show a certain amount of strength. Since that was the case, he decided to use this opportunity to tell the cavalrymen how powerful the person they were following was. Ah! It was only a penalty of half a year's salary. This was nothing to Zhui Feng, who was alone. But he was curious about why the sixth young master was looking for a horse. Puzzled, he asked, "Sixth young master, what do you need a horse for?" "Of course it's for a competition. This young master has already agreed to Ma Xiangshan's request. I can't just stand on the ground and fight with him. Moreover, it's not just me. The other Lengfeng soldiers and auxiliary soldiers also need war horses. Living here, how can one live without a horse?" Yang Qindong spoke as if this was a matter of course. These words not only stunned Windchaser, but also Wu Sheng and the others behind him. "Sixth young master, we don't need it. We have bicycles to ride. Those things are very fast and we don't need to eat food. Isn't that better?" Wu Sheng had never ridden a horse before. His soldiers also hadn't ridden a horse before. There was some resistance in his heart. "Yes, sixth young master, you can live here without a horse. The various forces here also have infantrymen. This is very normal." Windchaser also explained. There was no other way. He didn't know about this before, so he didn't prepare so many horses. This was a hole for nearly 4,000 war horses. How could it be solved so easily? Chapter 633. Yang Qindong shook his head. "I don't care what the other factions are like. Our cold front will either not do anything or be the strongest. It is a must for everyone to have their own warhorse. In the future, everyone should have at least 2 or more." Yang Qindong did not mention the matter of the bicycle. Although it did not require food, if it was used for a long period of time, it would inevitably have all sorts of problems. They were so far away from Crimson City that if a problem occurred, it would be impossible to fix it. Not to mention, riding a bicycle required a lot of stamina. It was fine to use it for a short period of time, but it was not as convenient as riding a horse. Yang Qindong's words were in order. Since he had made a decision, the others could only follow his orders. Fortunately, although Windchaser didn't have many warhorses, he still had some. Coincidentally, there was a wild horse in their stable. No one could tame it. Even Windchaser took a long time to cultivate his feelings for it. Only then could he get close to it without being rejected. However, that horse was really tall and muscular. At a glance, one could tell that it was a fine steed. If it became Yang Qindong's mount, it wouldn't be a loss of face. When Windchaser reported the situation to Yang Qindong, his interest was immediately piqued. "Oh, there's a warhorse like that? Come, let's go take a look." The warship had already reached the shore. The soldiers were all disembarking and unloading the supplies. With everything in order, most of the officers had nothing to do. Everyone followed the sixth young master to the stable. The stable did not have a fixed location. Usually, wherever the main army was, it would be built there. Right now, Windchaser's main forces were all around Sea Town, so the stable was in the middle of the town. After disembarking from the ship, they arrived at the stable after traveling for 4 li. From afar, the pure white wild horse was so eye-catching. Just looking at it from afar, Yang Qindong fell in love with it. In his previous life, Yang Dong was an absolute soldier king. No matter if it was flying, running in the water, or walking on land, there was nothing he could not understand. However, he did not know much about warhorses. Other than sometimes riding a horse in the racecourse to adapt to various roles in order to complete missions, he didn't have much contact with it. But what kind of horse was that? It had been trained and was very docile, unlike the horse in front of him. Before he even got close to him, he saw it constantly snorting, as if it was trying to keep people away. At the same time, its four hooves were constantly moving, as if it would give a kick to anyone who stepped forward. Good horse. Although he didn't know much about horses, this didn't stop Yang Qindong from liking it. He couldn't help but be eager to try. Sixth young master, please wait a moment. I'll put the saddle on him. Windchaser sucked in a breath of cold air. He could see the desire to conquer in the sixth young master's eyes, but this horse was really not easy to tame. He had raised the horse since he was young, but after so many days, he could only get close to it. Usually, he had to personally deliver the horse feed for this horse. It didn't care about other people's food. It was very arrogant. Yang Qindong didn't speak. He focused all his attention on the white horse. He began to imagine riding on it and galloping the earth. Windchaser took a saddle from one of his soldiers and began to approach slowly. As he approached, he kept saying, white horse, you must be obedient. Although I know you don't like this thing on your body, aren't horses born to be ridden by people? Accept your fate, accept your fate. Just like coaxing a child, Windchaser kept talking while approaching. He was very careful, as if the white horse would go crazy at any time. Tiger's Mane, Wu Sheng, and the others looked at this scene with a smile. They felt very interesting. After all, according to the sixth young master's intention, they would also need to ride horses in the future. There was no harm in understanding it in advance. Pang! Just when everyone's eyes were looking here, an unexpected scene happened. The originally restless white horse suddenly raised its hooves and kicked the approaching Windchaser without warning. Windchaser was too familiar with horses. A moment ago, he felt that the atmosphere was not right. When the horse raised its hooves, he suddenly retreated. Fortunately, the white horse was tied to a wooden stake. The distance it could move was limited, so it was able to avoid the attack. Just when everyone thought that it was a close call and applauded Windchaser's reaction, the scene suddenly changed. They saw that the wooden stake tied to the white horse was constantly moving. After a few moments, it was suddenly pulled up from the ground. Then the white horse neighed and rushed straight to Windchaser, who was closest to it. The horse borrowed the momentum of its hooves. With such a fast speed, everyone could imagine that once Windchaser was hit by the white horse, it would be a disaster. At this moment, even Windchaser himself was shocked. He first threw the saddle in his hand to the ground, then turned around and ran quickly. As a horse breeder, he naturally knew what would happen if the horse was frightened. Windchaser's speed was already very fast, just like his name. However, the white horse's speed was even faster. It fully utilized the strength of its legs, and when its four hooves landed, it covered a distance of several meters. In just a breath, it had already arrived behind Windchaser. Its pair of sturdy front hooves were raised high, and it directly smashed towards Windchaser's back. Once it fell, the 2,000 kilograms would be enough to break Windchaser's back. Even if that person could survive, he would be a cripple and unable to do anything. Pang! Just as everyone was shouting and Tiger Mang was about to pull out his pistol, a figure suddenly dashed past. Then, the white horse that was about to land suddenly stopped in midair. If one looked carefully, they would see that Yang Qindong was holding the rope that was tied to a wooden stake tightly in his hand. Just now, Yang Qindong felt the danger. His body suddenly rushed out and grabbed the rope, forcibly pulling the white horse. With such a pull, Yang Qindong's face couldn't help but turn red. The white horse was in its prime and belonged to the heavy horse breed. With a rough estimate, this horse was at least 2,300–400 kilograms, or even more. How could a person pull such a heavy weight? Feeling that at this moment, his hands were about to bleed, Yang Qindong couldn't help sinking his qi into his dantian and mobilizing the qi in his body. Only then did he feel that his arms and body felt better. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Wind Chaser finally escaped from under the horse. But he was already covered in cold sweat. It was obvious that he was really scared. When he saw the white horse being held back by someone, he was naturally very unhappy. When he turned around and saw that the instigator of all this was Yang Qindong, he could not help but turn around and gallop over. The momentum of this run was as heavy as 10,000 pounds. Don't shoot. Yang Qindong was looking at the white horse's eyes, but from the corner of his eyes, he noticed that tiger's mane, Beta Persei, and the guards had all taken out their guns. He quickly shouted, and then his body suddenly rushed to the side, avoiding the white horse's counterattack. The attack didn't succeed, and the white horse seemed to be angered. It continued to rush toward Yang Qindong's position, as if it wouldn't stop until it stepped on this person. With the support of qi, Yang Qindong was like a monkey, always able to avoid the white horse's attack at the last moment. At times, he would also counterattack, fiercely pulling the reins in his hand, bringing a trace of pressure to the white horse. One person and one horse fought a battle of wits and courage around the stable. Surprisingly, the white horse seemed to be quite intelligent. Sometimes it even knew how to make some fake movements, causing Yang Qindong to make mistakes. There were even a few times when it almost kicked the target because of this. Fortunately, the qi was indeed strong enough, especially now that he didn't need to use any strength, he only needed to dodge the white horse's attacks. This saved Yang Qindong a lot of energy, and the frequency of his counterattacks also became faster and faster. The sixth young master is so powerful. The scene in front of them had attracted more and more people to come here. When Leng Feng and the auxiliary soldiers saw the battle of wits and courage between the god of war and the white horse, they couldn't help but show a surprised expression. They only knew that the sixth young master's martial arts were very good, and his marksmanship was also very good. But all of this was just hearsay. Now that they finally had the chance to see it with their own eyes, everyone admired him in their hearts. In the blink of an eye, a quarter of an hour had passed. The white horse didn't have any intention of stopping its attack, nor did it show any signs of exhaustion. It was still incomparably brave and continued to attack. Relying on the qi, Yang Qindong dodged and counterattacked when the horse's hooves hit. He was also very brave and fierce. The man and the horse seemed to have reached a consensus, and that was, they must use this opportunity to determine the winner. Using the qi to resist the power, Yang Qindong could feel that the qi in his body was constantly surging out of his body. After it filled his entire body, it entered his right arm, causing his body to slowly become stronger at this moment. Although this change wasn't very fast, it won over a long period of time. A quarter of an hour had passed, and the qi didn't have any intention of stopping. It was constantly strengthening his body. This feeling was very subtle, and it made Yang Qindong feel very comfortable. Even though he could already subdue the white horse, he didn't do so. He wanted to use this opportunity to stimulate his stamina and make his body stronger. Outsiders didn't know what was going on, so naturally, they couldn't understand this. When they saw that Yang Qindong had already fought with the white horse for a quarter of an hour, and that the white horse was covered in sweat with a trace of blood, they couldn't help but worry for the sixth young master. Heavens, why is that horse bleeding red? Is it going to die? A member of the guard team didn't know what was going on and shouted loudly. What do you know? Only a Fergana horse would be completely red and even drip red sweat. Zhui Feng's subordinates who understood horses loudly explained. Chapter 634. Because of this answer, the others also turned their heads and looked at Wind-Chasing Wolf. Obviously, this person's speech on the horse could be called an expert and made people trust him. Feeling everyone's eyes on him, Wind-Chasing Wolf nodded without hesitation. Yes, there is such a saying. But usually, it is rare for a healthy horse to be red because of fatigue. As for the blood and sweat, it is only recorded in legends. Unexpectedly, this white horse is not red. It is also a pure Fergana horse. It was no wonder that wind-chasing wolf said this. Although no one stipulated that a Fergana horse must be red, at least the probability was higher. A white horse becoming a Fergana horse was not recorded in the book. Everyone finally knew the reason why the white horse turned red, but because of this, they were worried about the sixth young master. This was not an ordinary horse. If Yang Qindong did not stop him and was still so determined, they were afraid that Tiger's mane and Beta Persei would have shot again. Time passed by little by little. After half an hour, Yang Qindong could clearly feel that the qi in his body had stopped. He reluctantly stopped the movements of his hands. At this time, his physique was more than twice as strong as before. He was full of confidence that if he made a move now, he could already control the white horse. But he did not do so. He also knew that the white horse was very tired after turning red and sweating. He was afraid that it could not exert its original strength. That being the case, it was better to let it have a good rest and fight again tomorrow. He wanted to take the opportunity to see if there would be any benefits. Although it was very incredible to talk about such a strong physique, Yang Qindong even had datsang, so there was nothing to be surprised about. Too many illogical things had already happened. Even if that was the case, was there a need for one more or one less? Yang Qindong let go of the reins in his hand. White horse. No, it should be said that the red horse was standing there motionless and gasping for breath. Obviously, the fight just now was very tiring and it should not have any extra strength now. Men, tie it up and serve it well. Don't neglect it. Yang Qindong exhaled a mouthful of turbid qi and laughed heartily. Immediately, someone came forward to tie up the horse. Wind-chasing wolf also took the opportunity to come over. Sixth young master, this horse is now very tired. It is time to subdue it. Wind-chasing wolf was also worried that Yang Qindong did not know how to subdue a horse, so he spoke out of turn. Wind-chasing wolf's general meaning was that now was the best time to subdue the horse. Once the red horse became a white horse and recovered, it would be difficult to do so. Yang Qindong knew that Windchaser meant well, but Yang Qindong had his own ideas, so he waved his hand heroically. It's fine. I have to subdue it when it's at its strongest. Only then can it truly submit to me. The sixth young master is mighty. When the others heard Yang Qindong's words, they all showed a look of admiration. This was their sixth young master. If he wanted to deal with someone, he would deal with the strongest. He would never take advantage of others. The news of Yang Qindong fighting the white horse by himself quickly spread. Everyone knew about this matter. For a time, many people felt admiration for the sixth young master. In front of these men who killed people as if they were drinking water, if one wanted them to sincerely submit, prestige and status were not enough. One also needed to have great strength. Obviously, Yang Qindong now had this kind of strength. Of course, it was not all words of admiration. In fact, the sixth young master was also very tired after fighting with the white horse for half an hour. He had to pretend to be magnanimous and decided to fight again tomorrow. This kind of saying was not only said by one person, but it was not a hindrance. Many people would even say that people would get tired. To be able to fight with the white horse for half an hour without losing, and even win, who could do it? These words were all heard by Tiger's mane at night, and then he told Yang Qindong. In a temporary command tent, Yang Qindong was looking at the sand table and thinking about the next plan. Every time he went to a place, he would look at the map first. It had become a good habit for him. After all, if he did not even know the terrain and the various situations nearby, how could he talk about winning a battle? The strong would often think about how to use the terrain to win, and not passively wait for good luck to appear. Young Master. Tiger's mane appeared and reported the various discussions he heard. This was one of Yang Qindong's requests. If he wanted to know more about the thoughts of the soldiers, he had to know what they usually said. Well, I know. Yang Qindong said. For him, this was not a problem at all. As long as he could finally subdue the uncontrollable white horse, it would be a fact, and all the discussions would disappear. By the way, all the supplies have been transported to the shore. The supplies Yang Qindong asked about were naturally war supplies, including clothing, food, shelter, transportation, and all kinds of weapons and ammunition. This time, if Yang Qindong wanted to enter the grassland to fight, it would be too far away from the sea. It would be unrealistic to think about replenishing supplies like usual, so this time, he brought as much as he could to prepare for a long battle. It's all been transported to the shore. Commander Wu Sheng has also finished the handover work with the commander of the 2nd Marine Regiment, Long Yun Tian. It's too dark now, so the Navy decided to rest here for the night and prepare to leave early tomorrow morning. Tiger's Mane reported truthfully. This was the new, Ergon capital, the northern part of the Great Ming Dynasty. The sudden appearance of so many warships would scare many people. In order to not provoke them, the Navy's departure was inevitable. Come quietly, leave quietly. This was the order that Yang Qindong had given before. Okay, tomorrow morning, you will represent me to send off Commander Long. Yang Qindong nodded, indicating that he knew about this matter. As a subordinate battalion commander, sending him off with the identity of Tiger's Mane was already giving him a lot of face. Yes, young master. Tiger's Mane replied. Seeing that there was nothing else, he left. Yang Qindong was left alone, looking at the sand table and sinking into deep thought. The next morning, Long Yun Tian's troops left with a dozen or so large warships. Tiger's Mane personally sent them off, causing the battalion commander to be a little excited. This matter was not a big deal for the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Vanguard, the Windchaser Cavalry Regiment, and the 6 auxiliary battalions led by Commander Lu Zhua. They put more attention on the White Horse. Some of the soldiers who did not have the opportunity to witness this scene yesterday rushed over. Even the still injured Cavalry Regiment's 3rd Battalion Commander Ma Xiong-shan also rushed over. He also heard about yesterday's matter and was very curious about it. He naturally knew about the White Horse. He had tried to subdue it before, but unfortunately, he was unable to do so. And if Yang Qindong could do it, then presumably he would not need to use it in the following competition. With such great strength and the help of such a precious horse, it would be very difficult for him to be his opponent. After eating breakfast, there was already a sea of people outside the stable. Wherever there was space to stand, there would be people standing. They were all full of expectation as they waited for Yang Qindong to appear. When Yang Qindong appeared, there was a faint smile on the corner of his mouth. With so many people here, it was worth it for him to delay for a day to subdue the White Horse. He laughed heartily and fearlessly walked in front of the White Horse. When Yang Qindong appeared, the White Horse actually instinctively took 2 steps back. It was obvious that its intelligence was very high. It still clearly remembered that it was defeated by this man yesterday. No matter what the White Horse's performance was, Yang Qindong had already appeared. Then, he personally untied the reins, allowing the White Horse to regain its freedom. Then, he stretched out his large hand and pulled on the reins, as if he wanted to compete. The White Horse, who had suffered a loss yesterday, did not immediately submit. Perhaps it still wanted to fight, so it struggled with all its might, wanting to turn the situation around. However, when faced with Yang Qindong's infinite strength, it was useless. After struggling a few times, it realized that the man in front of it did not move at all. The White Horse could not help but snort. Then, it stood up with its front hooves, as if it was about to step on a person. Ha, good timing. With a loud shout, Yang Qindong jumped up and accurately landed on the White Horse's back. As his body fell, a huge force pressed down, causing the White Horse's body to tremble. Then, it desperately resisted and neighed. The White Horse knew that there were not many chances left for it to resist. If it could not flip this human off its back now, it was afraid that it could only choose to submit. As the king of horses, how could it be willing to be ridden by someone? It constantly twisted its body and even raised its front hooves, wanting to flip Yang Qindong off the horse. Unfortunately, no matter how hard it tried, Yang Qindong was like a rock, not moving at all. It was as if he was a part of the horse's back. Yang Qindong had already tried, and the increase in his physique that appeared yesterday was no longer there. In other words, if he wanted to rely on the white horse to continue increasing his strength, he would not be able to do so. Since that was the case, there was no need to be courteous, he would just submit. Yang Qindong's attitude was resolute. Both of his hands tightly grasped the reins, and his legs would occasionally clamp down on the white horse's body. Every time he exerted a huge force, the white horse would feel a burst of soreness. It could endure it once or twice, but after a few times, it finally felt afraid. It also knew that this man was powerful. Being subdued by such a powerful man was not a shameful thing, and it would accept it. After acknowledging Yang Qindong's strength, the white horse finally stopped resisting and became quiet. Suddenly, there was a tsunami of cheers. The sixth young master had used his strength to subdue the white horse. Was this not worthy of their cheers? It was said that horses were not humans. They would fear your authority and status. They would only obey the strong. Chapter 635. Ha ha ha. Yang Qindong jumped down from the horse's back with a happy face. He finally conquered the white horse. Although the qi did not appear, he was still very happy. Yang Er waved his hand in the distance and walked out of the crowd. He took out a saddle that had been prepared beforehand and put it on the white horse. The white horse was surrendering, but it was only surrendering to Yang Qindong. Naturally, it would not give face to the approach of strangers. Its front hooves were constantly thrown, and it looked like it would kick whoever dared to come over. Well, this is my brother. In the future, when I don't have time, he will take care of you. Feeling the white horse's restlessness, Yang Qindong turned around and touched the horse's head. The intention of intimacy was very obvious. As if it enjoyed Yang Qindong's touch, the white horse quickly calmed down and let Beta Persei put on the saddle that imprisoned its freedom. Sixth young master, since the white horse has surrendered, why don't you give it a name? Good horses have names. Windchaser saw Yang Qindong succeed and said with envy. He did not have any thoughts of jealousy. The sixth young master subdued the white horse with his own ability. This was something he could not do. Well, I should give it a name. Why don't I call it White Dragon? Yang Qindong looked at the white horse's body and said after thinking for a while. White Dragon Horse, good name. Suddenly, more than one person said flattering words. This may have the meaning of flattery, but the name was really good. But when someone mentioned the White Dragon Horse, Yang Qindong's face could not help but be embarrassed. If it was the White Dragon Horse, wouldn't he become Tang Seng? Ah! Yang Qindong subdued the White Dragon Horse, making his image suddenly become tall. Ma Xiangshan, who was watching from the crowd, also walked out and knelt in front of Yang Qindong. Sixth young master, I offended you before. I'm sorry. I admit that I'm not your opponent. Ha, get up. Yang Qindong was in a good mood. He laughed heartily and helped Ma Xiangshan up. He asked with concern, how is it? Are you feeling better now? Yesterday, the young master sent someone to deliver the medicine to you. Have you taken it? Thank you, sixth young master, for your concern. I've already taken some of the medicine and it's working very well. Ma Xiangshan said emotionally. This was not flattery. He was truly touched. He was the one who provoked the sixth young master. Not only did he not hold a grudge, he even sent someone to deliver medicine to express his concern. It just so happened that the other party's strength was so strong that even the white horse, no. Even the White Dragon Horse could be subdued. There should be no problem in dealing with him. If it was him who had strong strength, facing the provocation of the soldiers below, he would definitely teach them a lesson. He would never be so low-key and patient. Just based on this, he sincerely admired Yang Qindong. Well, get better soon. We still have to go to the battlefield to kill the enemy. Yang Qindong patted the other party's arm with concern. From this moment on, he had completely subdued the other party's heart. The white dragon horse had been subdued. The next step was to study the next battle plan. For this, Yang Qindong already had a plan in his heart. He announced the first military order after coming to the new, Gan City Department. That was, everyone had to learn to ride from the soldiers of the cavalry regiment. The time limit was only 10 days. After 10 days, those who learned how to ride and kill the enemy on horseback would enter the battle order. On the other hand, there were so many supplies that needed to be looked after. Those who did not know how to ride would enter the logistics camp. Speaking of supplies, Yang Qindong took out a shiny long saber. This saber had a wide back and a thin blade. The body of the saber was relatively heavy, which was good for increasing the strength of slashing. The blade was smooth, and the handle was slightly curved towards the blade. This kind of curved handle was easier for the rider to control and not easy to drop. For example, the sabers used by the Mongolian cavalry were thinner and lighter than the military sabers. The Mongolians' riding skills were exquisite. They mainly relied on the powerful impact of the horse's speed to drive the saber to complete the slashing and other tactical movements. The saber in Yang Qindong's hand was an improved version of the saber. It had more advantages. At the same time, the body of the saber was made entirely of steel, making it stronger and sharper. If it was a person with great strength, it was possible to cut the opponent's saber in half with one slash. There were also soldiers in the cavalry regiment who carried sabers. However, their sabers were not very sharp. Most of them were spoils of war, and some of them were seriously worn out. Now that there was a new saber that was so sharp in front of them, who knew how many people were tempted? Everyone looked at the shiny saber with a longing expression and drooled. Seeing the longing in everyone's eyes, Yang Qindong laughed and said, "Don't be anxious. Everyone has one. This young master also hopes that you can use this sharp saber to kill the enemy and show the might of our army." Kill the enemy. Show the might. Immediately, some people began to shout loudly. Then, their voices became unified, and they shouted together in an imposing manner. If you want to attack first, you must first sharpen your weapon. Without enough logistical support, although guns could still be used, they could not be used endlessly like before. Thus, the saber became a necessity. Yang Qindong started to look forward to the scene of them riding on horseback and sweeping away thousands of enemies. The idea was beautiful, but when it came to training, the results on the first day were not as good as expected. The soldiers were used to fighting on land. When they suddenly rode on horseback, their legs could not exert force. Naturally, they were not used to it. Some of them even fell off their horses without doing anything. It was a laughable scene. Fortunately, the cold vanguard was made up of able-bodied men. They had a good foundation and rich battle experience. Even when they fell off their horses, they instinctively took precautions. Therefore, there weren't many casualties. After falling off their horses, more and more soldiers began to get used to the necessary skill of a cavalry. Yang Qindong was the same as the soldiers. He also began to train his equestrian skills. Although he was strong, had a strong physique, good endurance, and was very flexible, it did not have much to do with whether he knew how to ride a horse or not. If one wanted to fight on horseback and kill in all directions, one must learn how to kill on horseback. Ma Xiangshan, who was very experienced in this aspect, became the instructor for Yang Qindong, his guards, and the recon company. This time, when they came to the north to expand their territory and influence, scouts were essential. Considering that the two provinces of Vietnam and Laos also needed scouts to explore the enemy situation as a response, this time there was only one reconnaissance company that followed Yang Chen to the north. The company commander was the original battalion commander, Su Yunsheng. This was not because Su Yunsheng had made a mistake. He just wanted to achieve more military achievements. Without a doubt, now that the war in the north was about to start, there were more opportunities here. Therefore, he used his authority to follow Yang Qindong's troops as a company commander. Yang Qindong knew Su Yunsheng very well. He was also happy to have him by his side. This way, he could save a lot of time. Now, the recon company was able to benefit. They were able to follow Yang Qindong and his guards to train their equestrian skills. Compared to the other cold front, the brothers of the recon company had a foundation in equestrian skills. Usually, when they were scouting for information, they would often complete missions on horseback. Therefore, when they first started, they were still a little arrogant. If it was not for the sixth young master beside them, they probably would not even look at Ma Xiangshan. After all, scouts had their own pride. Ma Xiangshan did not take the scouts who had a foundation in equestrian skills seriously. In the first class, he even said bluntly, maybe some people already know how to ride a horse and feel that they have a certain level of equestrian skills. But as your temporary instructor, what I want to say is that your so-called equestrian skills are extremely laughable in my eyes. What you know should not be called equestrian skills. At most, it is just riding a horse. These arrogant words naturally attracted the dissatisfaction of the scouts. There were even a few warriors who thought that their equestrian skills were good enough to provoke them. They looked as if they were saying, don't just say nice things, let's compete if you have the ability. As for the challenge, Ma Xiangshan gladly accepted it. He came up with a plan, which was to see who could run the distance of 2 miles first. This was the most basic requirement of equestrian skills. After all, if both sides were cavalry, whoever was faster would obviously have a bigger advantage. It was just a 2-mile run. For cavalry, it was not a test at all. They could run it in the blink of an eye. Everyone understood this principle and accepted the test. Then, Tiger's Mane personally acted as the referee. After the order was given, several scouts who challenged Ma Xiangshan spurred their horses and ran wildly. They had received training before such a competition and thought that they were not worse than anyone. However, when they really started to gallop, they realized that Ma Xiangshan had already ridden away, leaving everyone with a distant back. They thought that even if they lost to Ma Xiangshan in a 2-mile race, the difference would not be too big. After all, the distance was very close. However, when the real competition started, these scouts realized that their strength was so far behind. After the competition, everyone recognized Ma Xiangshan's strength. The instructor began to integrate into the role, constantly talking about his understanding of equestrian skills and the things that needed to be paid attention to. For example, he first talked about the lightness and consistency when riding a horse. Horses performed best when they were relaxed and unrestrained, so the contact between the rider's hand and the horse's mouth must be very light. The pressure on the reins should not be more than a few ounces. The force on the hindquarters, including extra muscle movements. Horses would be like all living things, trying to avoid work. If the reins were loose, it would easily avoid the rider's seat and leg support. If the rider succeeded in making the horse's hindquarters bear the weight, the horse's balance would be improved. The horse would raise its head and neck to reduce the pressure on the reins, and the rider could shorten the reins. If the rider grasped the correct bearing and riding scale, it would achieve the effect of man and horse as one. Chapter 636. The rider had to maintain a continuous impact. This could only be achieved if the rider's riding skills were good and their hands were still relative to the horse. If the rider could maintain a good state of communication with the horse, it would not be a problem to place their hands in front of the saddle or on the thighs. This would stabilize the hands. When the hands were free, the cavalry could swing the saber and continuously carry out actions to kill the enemy. From there, they could kill in all directions and achieve the final victory of the battle. Then he also talked about how to turn and stop while riding. Finally, he also talked about how to release the bow while riding. It could be done quickly and accurately. In short, this was a complicated process. Even if the cold front soldiers' ability to understand was not bad, it was not something they could learn in a mere 10 days. Some things they only needed to grasp the theory. Later on, they still needed to learn, master, and apply it on the battlefield. Yang Qindong also learned from Ma Xiangshan for 3 days. But after just 3 days, he had learned about 80% of what Ma Xiangshan had learned. Not only that, but Yang Qindong and the White Dragon horse's tacit understanding had begun to develop. He could even do one difficult action after another on the horse's back. For example, his body hid on the side of the White Dragon horse to avoid the enemy's long-range arrow attack. For example, he only had one foot on the horse's pedal so his whole body could freely attack. He even did a difficult action that even Ma Xiangshan could not do. That was to jump into the air, kill the enemy, and then return to the White Dragon horse's back. With the flexibility of the body and the complete cooperation of the White Dragon horse, after only 3 days, Ma Xiangshan announced that the 6th young master had become the first outstanding student to graduate. This was not something that was given based on one's status or identity. Instead, it was an honor that was obtained based on one's talent. This naturally caused the soldiers to exclaim again and again. Then everyone became numb. It seemed that no matter what happened to the 6th young master, it was normal. 3 days later, Yang Qindong graduated and returned to the temporary command tent. He called Windchaser and asked about the progress of the matter. This matter was given to Windchaser by Yang Qindong 3 days ago. In view of the current situation, the first thing they had to solve was the problem of horses. According to Yang Qindong, it was too late to buy horses. Moreover, the quality of the newly bought horses was different, so it would take extra time to train them. Thus, it was better to just snatch other people's horses. Windchaser agreed with Yang Qindong's idea. After all, he didn't need 10 or 20 horses this time, but a total of 4,000 horses. If he wanted to rely on buying them, he didn't know how long it would take to complete the task. Since he had decided to steal a horse, he had to find a suitable target first. Coincidentally, there were 2 Baiming Qianhu's posts on the left and right of Hai Town. Furthermore, there was also a great Ming dynasty's guard post on the south side. The guard post system was also known as the guard post system. It was the main military system of the Ming dynasty and was created by Ming Taizu. Its concept came from the Sui and Tang dynasty's Fu army system. The Qianhu post was also called the Qianhu guard post. It naturally referred to 1,000 households. The Qianhu post had 1,120 soldiers, and there were 10 Qianhu posts, each with 112 soldiers. Each post had 2 main banners, each with 50 soldiers. Each main banner had 5 small banners, each with 10 soldiers. The general of the Qianhu guard post was called the Qianhu guard post and was a grade 5 official. The guard post was bigger than the Qianhu post. There were 5 Qianhu posts on the left, right, middle, front, and back. The 5 Qianhu guards post consisted of 5,600 soldiers. The guard post was a grade 3 official. The commander Qianhu post was a grade 3 official. The commander Qianhu post was a grade 4 official. The guard post was a grade 5 official. According to the Great Ming dynasty's military system, the positions of guard post and below were hereditary. From this point, it could be seen that the Great Ming dynasty's military background was very important. Many people who became generals didn't know how to fight and only had a good background. Yang Qindong had no choice but to target the Baiming guard post. Although he didn't want to fight with Baiming right now, if he couldn't avoid it, he wouldn't be afraid to fight. Reporting to the 6th young master, in the past 3 days, I have sent people to investigate the guard post and the 2 Qianhu posts. Among them, the Shuangshan guard post has 300 healthy horses, the Maoyan guard post has 300 healthy horses, and the Jianzhou left guard post has 2,000 healthy horses. Together, they have a total of 2,600 horses. Although it isn't enough to satisfy all of our requirements, it isn't far off. When the time comes, we will pay to buy some more and the gap won't be too big. Listening to Zhui Feng speak so seriously, Yang Qindong seemed to be somewhat dissatisfied and shook his head. They have so many people, but they only have so few horses. If this was said by someone else, Zhui Feng would definitely scold them. What did they mean by only having so few horses? It was true that New Gandusi had a vast land source and abundant water plants, but there weren't many self-raised horses. Most of them were bought from other races. This also explained why in this area, the Ming dynasty had the most people, but their combat strength wasn't the strongest. After all, not only did they need to buy healthy horses, but they also needed to buy horse materials and so on. Together, it was not a small expense. Alright, no matter what, with these war horses, our strength will be greatly improved. As if he had thought it through, Yang Qindong finally nodded and agreed to make a move on these 3 places. From his words, it seemed like those horses had already become his. In fact, it wasn't difficult to do this. With the most advanced firearms and catching them off guard, there was no reason to lose. Now the difficult part was how to mobilize these horses. Of course, Yang Qindong could take the initiative to attack the city. But if he did that, it would attract the attention of the Beiming imperial court. It was even possible that they would send troops in. If this was the case, it would reduce the pressure on the Walla army. This wasn't something that Yang Qindong wanted to see. Can you think of a way to mobilize them? Yang Qindong looked at Zhui Feng and asked. This subordinate will think of a way. Zhui Feng knew that this was the time to test him. This was facing the 6th young master. He had to perform well. He didn't make any guarantees, nor did he say no. Zhui Feng went out of the tent to find his 3 battalion commanders and his company commander Ding Shan. He told them what the 6th young master wanted. The 4 of you are the backbone of the cavalry regiment. Now, tell me, do you have any ideas or solutions? Windchaser looked at the 4 subordinates with the same expectant gaze and asked with the thought that 3 heads were better than 1. The 4 people fell into silence. After about 2 or 3 minutes, 3rd Battalion Commander Ma Xiangshan and his company commander Ding Shan raised their heads at the same time and said in unison, selling horses. Sell horses. Zhui Feng was stunned at first, but he quickly recovered and a smile appeared on his face. That's right, I'll sell the horses. Like this, company commander Ding Shan will complete this mission. If you need anything, the cavalry regiment will support you. The idea was thought of by 2 people. Windchaser did put the task on Ding Shan's head. This was not to favor one side, but in his opinion, Ma Xiangshan was still acting as an instructor. It was not good for him to leave. More importantly, no one was more suitable than Ding Shan to complete the task of selling horses. The reason was that no one was more cunning than Ding Shan. Ding Shan was the cavalry company commander of the regiment. Many times, he was responsible for investigating the enemy. Sometimes, in order to investigate the enemy more clearly, he needed to go to the enemy's territory. At this time, disguises were very important. He didn't know how many times he had appeared in the enemy's territory as a merchant and completed the mission very well. Therefore, this mission belonged to none other than him. Okay. Ding Shan didn't refuse and then added, I've long heard that the vice 1,000 households of the double city guard, Zhang Mingji, is very greedy. I want to start with him. No problem at all. You don't need to report what to do. The 6th young master only wants results. I hope you can have a better performance this time. Zhui Feng said with a serious face. Yes, I promise to complete the mission. Ding Shan stood at attention and gave a standard military salute. He turned and left the tent. Ding Shan went to carry out the mission. The training in the camp didn't stop. They had already trained for 9 days. Everyone's progress was very fast. Tomorrow was the day of the test and also the time to decide their status. Many people were nervous and excited. In this atmosphere, Ding Shan returned to the camp and brought back a piece of good news that made Zhui Feng happy. Not long after, he took Ding Shan to the temporary command tent where Yang Qindong was resting. In the command tent, Yang Qindong saw Zhui Feng and Ding Shan. He seriously listened to the reports of the two and had a preliminary understanding of the battle plan. Ding Shan was a young man who wasn't very tall and always had a smile on his face. Perhaps it was because of the slight evil in his smile that he was able to disguise himself as a merchant so smoothly and vividly. According to Ding Shan, after he took the mission, he went to the double city guard and then spent some silver to easily meet the vice 1,000 households here, Zhang Mingji. Zhang Mingji had relied on his ancestors to obtain the position of vice head of the 1,000 prefectures. Just like his name, he was very wise and knew what was best for him. The reason he found Zhang Mingji was because he was a smart person. Ding Shan liked to deal with smart people. This could save him a lot of time and energy. Zhang Mingji saw Ding Shan in a tea house in the city. His hands were behind his back and his face was hidden. Ding Shan didn't know how many of these great Ming generals he had seen. They always had a high and mighty appearance as though they looked down on the people of the world. However, they didn't have much in their stomach. General Zhang. Although he looked down on him, Ding Shan's attitude was very low on the surface. Weren't merchants like this? They only had benefits in their eyes. In order to achieve their goals, they were even willing to act like a grandson. Chapter 637. N. He snorted with his nostrils facing the sky as a greeting. After he was completely seated, he caressed the teacup and spoke with an indifferent expression. You're surnamed Ding. I heard from Xiao Wuzi that you want to see me. And you want to do business with me? The so-called Xiao Wuzi was the middleman Ding Shan had found. He was a broker in the city and was equivalent to the current middleman and introducer. Don't underestimate these brokers. Although their status wasn't very high, they had a wide range of connections. They knew many people from all walks of life. Many things that were impossible in the eyes of others could often be turned upside down once they made contact with one of them. Yes, this one's surname is Ding. I'm the 5th brother I found. Ding Shan's face was full of flattery. It was very in line with the face of a businessman who smiled when he saw people. And, that's enough. Your surname isn't important. After this matter, I will forget about it. Just tell me what business you want to do with me this time. Let me tell you, this general is very busy. If it's a small business, then don't waste each other's time here. He acted as if he was very busy with work and had a lot of things to do. He didn't even look Ding Shan in the eye. Ding Shan didn't care about Zhang Mingji's disdain at all. He also didn't plan on forming any friendship with this person. Everyone met for their own purposes. Yes, since General Zhang says so, then this one will make a long story short. I have a batch of warhorses on hand and I'm anxious to sell them. I don't know if General Zhang has any thoughts. As if out of instinct, Zhang Mingji waited for the other to finish speaking before he hurriedly lowered the price. I thought it was some big business. So it's warhorses. Let me tell you. Wait, what did you just say? Warhorses. When he suddenly understood that Ding Shan's business was warhorses, his expression changed greatly. He no longer had the careless appearance from before. Yes, warhorses. This time, it was Ding Shan's turn to become serious. Zhang Mingji carefully sized up Ding Shan. He didn't seem to believe the other's words. He asked again as if to confirm, what's your surname? Oh, you are Boss Ding, right? Are you sure you want to trade war horses with me, not ordinary horses? It wasn't strange that Zhang Mingji would ask this. The law of the Great Ming Dynasty stipulated that war horses were not allowed to be bought and sold privately. However, it was different for ordinary horses. As long as the quantity was not too large, private transactions were not prohibited. Of course, the price of war horses was several times higher than that of ordinary horses. I'm sure. I'm 100% sure that they are war horses. Oh, that's right. General Zhang, please look outside. Do you see my strong horse tied to the pole? That's the one I rode, and this is one of them. Pointing at the healthy horse outside the tea house, Ding Shan said with a flaunting look. Although his current position was inherited from his ancestors, Zhang Mingji wasn't a complete good-for-nothing. At least, he still had a certain understanding of horses. This was because he had done a lot of horse trading in the past, but it was his first time dealing with warhorses. Firstly, the trading of warhorses was illegal, and no one dared to look for these officials. Secondly, who would sell a warhorse when they had one? Those with power would be afraid of having too few people. Under suspicion, Zhang Mingji looked at the horse outside the tea house. With his eyesight, he could see that the quality of the horse was good. It was muscular and full of strength. This horse is good, but how many are there? He quickly suppressed the shock in his heart. In Zhang Mingji's view, although the quality of these warhorses was good, they weren't rare goods. It was normal to have 3 to 5 of them. Ding Shan had been observing the changes in Zhang Mingji's expression. He was already certain in his heart. Seeing the other party ask about the number, he stretched out 4 fingers. Only 4. Zhang Mingji breathed a sigh of relief. 4 warhorses wasn't that surprising. If he wanted, he could take the risk and get 4 from the army in the city. No. Ding Shan shook his head and waved his extended fingers. No. Then it's 40. At this moment, Zhang Mingji's interest was piqued. For him, if it was really 40, then it attracted his interest. No, no. General Zhang, can't you think about the bigger picture? Ding Shan looked as if he was trying his best to guess and not afraid of being scared. Sitting across from him, Zhang Mingji was really frightened at this moment. Since Ding Shan dared to say so, then it definitely wasn't 40. Could it be 400? Hiss. At this moment, Zhang Mingji couldn't stay calm. It wasn't that he hadn't seen 400 warhorses before. Didn't the nearby Jianzhou left guard have 2,000 warhorses? But that belonged to the Beiming imperial court, and these 400 were private transactions. If the matter was done, it would belong to him, and he could sell it to the army at a high price. He could even think of a way to snatch these warhorses and give them to the Jianzhou left guard. It would definitely be a great merit. At that time, he might be promoted and become a true Qianhu. Don't underestimate the difference between a Qianhu and a Qianhu. There was a huge difference in power between the two. It was so big that some people couldn't achieve it in their lifetime. Zhang Mingji relied on his inheritance to become a Qianhu. It seemed that his starting point was very high, but if nothing unexpected happened, he might stop there for the rest of his life. When it came to his next generation, he wouldn't be a Qianhu, but a Qianhu. For his descendants, he was under a lot of pressure. At this moment, his thoughts turned many times. In the end, he made up his mind. This matter had to be done, and it had to be done well. As for the present, he would first stabilize Ding Shan's mind, and then make a plan later. Cough. 400 warhorses, right? Zhang Mingji's voice trembled slightly, indicating the excitement in his heart at the moment. Yes, it is 400, but I don't know if General Zhang can eat them all. If he can, how much silver can I give for each one? Of course, the quality is guaranteed. Each one won't be worse than the one outside. Pointing outside the tea house, Ding Shan still had a smile on his face. Yes, if there are no problems with the quality, it's only 400 warhorses. I'll take them. At this moment, Zhang Mingji had to put on a rich and overbearing appearance. He couldn't show his cowardice and let Ding Shan doubt him. If that was the case, then this business deal wouldn't be able to be done. He also didn't ask where the warhorses came from. This was the rule. The buyer didn't ask the seller where the goods came from. Because of this, there were many good and cheap goods circulating in the market. Okay. Ding Shan also had a very happy expression. Then he looked at Zhang Mingji with a longing gaze, as if waiting for him to make a bid. Zhang Mingji only thought for a moment before nodding. Okay, if there are no problems with the quality, I can give you 200 silver for each warhorse. How about it? In the normal market, an ordinary warhorse only cost around 30 silver. A warhorse's price was around 100 to 120 silver. The specific price depended on the warhorse's health and leg strength. But with so many warhorses, of course, it couldn't be treated like normal. Often, the more warhorses there were, the more expensive they were. But the price of 200 silver per warhorse was very sincere. It was even higher than the market price and the black market price. 200 silver per warhorse, 400 warhorses would be 80,000 silver. This was definitely not a small number, and it was definitely not something a small vice-thousand households could decide. But Zhang Mingji didn't think too much before making a decision. This could only prove one thing, which was that he was determined to get it. But Ding Shan didn't seem to see this. He just kept smiling and nodding, looking very much like a greedy merchant. The price was settled. Next was the location of the transaction. 3 days later, at Horn Mountain Colonel, the two sides agreed to trade there, one hand for the goods. Only then did Ding Shan leave. Zhang Mingji looked at the departing figure and fell into deep thought. Since such a big piece of fat meat was in front of him, he had to eat it. The problem now was how to eat it. 400 warhorses. Not to mention him, even with the current strength of the Twin City Guards, it would be difficult to eat. It seemed that he had to inform the Jianzhou left guard. This was also the reason why he insisted on the transaction 3 days later. On the surface, he said to Ding Shan that he wanted to gather silver. After all, 80,000 silver was not a small amount. But in reality, he wanted to give enough time to inform the left guard. Although the warhorses could communicate with each other, it would take 2 days to go and return. In addition, they needed to make preparations. 3 days was just right. As a company commander directly under the regiment, Ding Shan's brain was definitely enough. He had seen through Zhang Mingji's bad intentions, but he wasn't afraid. If it was in the past, with only their cavalry regiment, it would be troublesome to take the initiative to provoke such an enemy. But now, with the 6th Young Master and the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front and 6 auxiliary battalions, what was there to fear? In the temporary command tent, Ding Shan gave a detailed account of his meeting with Zhang Mingji. In the end, he also mentioned his suspicions. Then, he tightly shut his mouth. In this tent, no one, from the 6th Young Master to the 3 regimental commanders and the battalion commanders, had the right to speak as a company commander. Very good. This time, Company Commander Ding has done a meritorious service. Yang Qindong waited for Ding Shan to finish explaining the situation, then praised him generously. Then, his gaze began to search the sand table. Soon, he found the place called Horn Mountain Colonel. The new, Gan City Sea was now outside the pass, in the area of the 3 northeastern provinces. Before it was heavily developed, there were only plains and high mountains here. The tall mountains were connected one after another, giving people a very grand and spectacular feeling. The plain stretched as far as the eye could see, and one could not see the end of it, but one could also see very far away. But there were some special environments in this kind of terrain. For example, Horn Mountain Col was the connecting point between the high mountains and the plains. It belonged to the area below the mountains. Chapter 638. With the mountain behind them, they could block the cold winds of the northeast winter. This kind of place was suitable for the local people to live in. Slowly, it formed a village of 100 families. The surrounding fields had also been properly developed. And this kind of place had a special characteristic. It was very suitable for an ambush. On one side of Horn Mountain Col was a tall mountain and dense forest. Imagine, if there was an ambush there, what kind of effect would it have? If they charged down from above, they would gain the upper hand. There was also a village at the foot of the mountain. They only needed to block the entrance to the colonel. Then wouldn't the people who came here be caught? Since Zhang Mingji had chosen this place for the transaction, he must have a plan. Perhaps he had already arranged spies in this Horn Mountain Call village. In other words, the other side had the upper hand. If Ding Shan dared to play any tricks, he would not be able to escape his eyes. How many enemies does the Twin City Guard have? How many troops will they send? After some consideration, Yang Qindong asked Wind Chaser, the leader of the cavalry regiment, who was standing at the side. Zhui Feng thought carefully and quickly gave a general answer. Replying to 6th young master, the Twin City Guard only has a single 1,000 households stationed there. There are only 1,000 or so people stationed there. Since they want to swallow this warhorse, they can't let anyone know about it. They won't send too many people either. I estimate that other than the original 300 cavalrymen, they will at most send another 200 infantrymen, half of the total force. This was not Zhui Feng's guess, but the result of countless experiences. Often, there would be other races causing trouble in this area. The nearby Baiming cities would often send half of their troops. After all, there were large amounts of people and things that belonged to them in the city. They could not just throw away the watermelon and pick up the sesame. They were also afraid of being lured away by the enemy and not even having a home to call home. Half of their forces. Easy. Yang Qindong naturally showed a confident smile after hearing this. A plan was slowly taking shape in his mind. About a quarter of an hour later, he looked at the sand table again and began to arrange the combat tasks. Battalion Commander Gao Danhua, Yu, Company Commander Ding Shan, and Company Commander Su Yunxing will be in charge of dealing with the Baiming army in Hornhill. Colonel, remember, killing the enemy is a must, and taking their warhorses is your main goal. Of course, you cannot let a single person go and leak the news. Battalion Commander Deng Yu, Battalion Commander Ma Xiangshan, your 2 cavalry battalions will be in charge of dealing with the enemies of the Mao Yan guards who may come to help. If there are no accidents, they will definitely send 300 cavalrymen, so you must keep their warhorses. The rest of the people will be with this young master to ambush the main force of the Jianzhou left guard in the Stone Mountain area. Everyone should familiarize yourself with your mission and the terrain as soon as possible. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask this young master at any time. With the advantage of superior forces, excellent equipment, and the surprise of the attack, Yang Qindong was 100% sure that he could deal a heavy blow to the Baiming cavalry. The key question now was how many warhorses they could keep. With his orders, the regiments, battalions, and companies quickly began to mobilize and divide the work before the battle. Only one day later, except for a company of auxiliary soldiers left to guard the supplies, the rest of the soldiers all moved out and went to their own targets. At the same time, a warhorse in charge of communication also entered the Jianzhou Left Guard's office. The commander of the Jianzhou Left Guard was called Chindula. He was a brave general and the only high-ranking general in the Jianzhou Left Guard's office that did not rely on inheritance. He had the official position of Baiming third-grade general. After Zhang Mingji and Ding Shan separated, they went to the barracks to find Qianhu Hiying. After a discussion, they both felt that with their own strength, it was impossible for them to take down 400 warhorses. They decided to report it to their superiors and ask the Jianzhou Left Guard and the neighboring city's Maoyan Guard to send troops to help. As a reward, the Shuangqian Guard would get 150 warhorses, the Maoyan Guard would get 50, and the Jianzhou Left Guard would get 200. There was no other way. The Jianzhou Left Guard was a Jianzhou Left Guard, and its strength was too great. If they were asked to help, they had to give enough benefits, even though they were family. But brothers still had to settle accounts clearly, right? As for the Maoyan Guard, they only needed to send troops to help, and they would get 50 warhorses for free. No matter how one looked at it, it was a profit. In the Jianzhou Left Guard, Commander Chindula, who received the news, called over his fellow commanders Liang Xian, secondary grade 3, and Commander Tang Longtian, primary grade 4, to discuss how to cooperate with the Shuangqian Guard to take down these 400 warhorses. This is a piece of fat meat, hee. Tang Longtian, who received the news, rubbed his calloused hands and laughed. This Shuangchen guard is quite tactful, giving us half of the benefits. Since that's the case, I'll take action once. Later, I'll take 2,000 cavalry with me. Hee, then everything will be easy. Commander Liang Xian spoke with an insufferably arrogant expression on his face. Liang Xian had inherited the position of Commander Liang Xian through the virtue of his ancestors. In reality, the Liang family was considered a wealthy and powerful family in Baiming, so ordinary people naturally wouldn't enter his eyes. This gave him a natural arrogance. Even in the entire Jianzhou left guard, there was no one else who could enter his eyes other than Commander Chendula. Under his arrogance and the powerful Liang family background, no one could stop him from doing whatever he wanted. Even if it was Chendula, who was half a rank higher, but because of the Tang family's background, as long as Liang Xian didn't go overboard, he would turn a blind eye. To be able to get 200 warhorses in one action was definitely not a small merit. Needless to say, Liang Xian wanted this merit and wanted to take action. What else could Chendula say? He also didn't think that there was any power nearby that could stop his 2,000 cavalry. Oh! There was a unit under the banner of the 5-star army that could be considered to have some power. They had more than 1,000 people, but the two sides had never directly dealt with each other. The other side also seemed to be very friendly towards Baiming, so there was no need to consider their threat. Besides, how could 1,000 cavalry be a match for his 2,000 elite cavalry? Since there was no danger, he would just let Liang Xian do what he wanted. Since Chendula didn't care anymore, Liang Xian naturally became the one who made the decision. He called over Hu Ji, a minor 5th rank official, and had him gather 2,000 cavalrymen. The next morning, they would follow him to carry out the military mission. The matter was settled like this. From the beginning to the end, no one asked about the origin of the 400 warhorses. It had to be said that they were indeed very careless. Perhaps it was because the Baiming army had been ruling here for many years and they were used to the feeling of having everything under control. The cavalry of the Jianzhou left guard decided to set off on the morning of the third day because the time of the transaction was set at noon. As long as they were fast enough, they would naturally be able to make it. However, Yang Qindong set the time of departure on the morning of the day before, which gave them an extra day to prepare. Based on this point, the Baiming army had no reason to be undefeated. Many people said that opportunities were prepared for those who were prepared. Not only were you weak, but you also didn't have enough preparation and time to prepare. How could you say that you were undefeated? Horn Mountain Call, on the morning of the third day, suddenly became lively. The small area, which originally only had 100 households, suddenly had 300 Baiming cavalry, and the atmosphere became somewhat tense. The 300 cavalry were personally led by Vice Qianhu Zhang Mingji. He had no intention of hiding it. After all, the transaction this time was 400 warhorses. If they didn't bring enough people, how could they bring these warhorses back? He believed that even Ding Shan wouldn't be able to say anything after seeing this formation. Of course, on the surface, there were only 300 cavalry, but in the dark, on the back mountain of Horn Mountain Call, there were 200 infantry lying in ambush. If it weren't for the safety of the Twin City Guards, perhaps even Qianhu Hiying would personally make a trip. 300 cavalrymen and 200 infantrymen in the dark. This made Zhang Mingji very confident. In addition, the 300 cavalrymen of the Mao Yan Guard and 2,000 cavalrymen of the Jian Province Left Guard would appear one after another after receiving the news. This made him very confident. He believed that everything was under his control. Now he only had to wait for the seller Ding Shan to appear. The agreed time was noon. When smoke began to slowly rise from the chimneys of the families in the small village of Horn Mountain Call, a large group of horses arrived at the village gate. The group was made up of 400 warhorses, and each warhorse had a rider. Not only that, but there were also more than 100 people following from the left and right. It seemed like the group was quite large. "They're here." Zhang Mingji immediately noticed the caravan and a smirk appeared on his face, as if he had succeeded in his scheme. This Ding Shan really didn't go back on his word. He really did bring a group of 400 warhorses. This person really was stupid, daring to trust him so much. At this moment, Zhang Mingji already viewed Ding Shan and this group of horses as a piece of fat meat that had jumped into a bowl. Although there were 400 cavalry and 100 men that appeared with the group of horses, he had already automatically ignored them. What kind of place was this? This was Bai Ming's slave Ganda Sai. Who dared to make an enemy of the Ming army here? Under the preconceived notions of an official, he didn't think that there would be people who dared to make an enemy out of them, or that they would be unfavorable to him. He didn't put any of the dangers in his eyes. All he saw were benefits and opportunities. Just as Company Commander Ding Shan and 2nd Battalion Commander Gao Danhua led 500 cavalry and 400 warhorses into the village, in the back mountains of Horn Mountain Call, a smokeless massacre was taking place. The ones being massacred were the 200 Bai Ming infantry sent from Shuangcheng. The killers were the Reconnaissance Battalion Commander Su Yunsheng and his subordinates, 100 soldiers. With 100 elite reconnaissance battalion soldiers against 200 Bai Ming infantry whose combat strength was only around 3rd class, and also a sneak attack, there was no problem in winning. In silence, Bai Ming soldiers hiding in the forest were killed one after another. Many of the soldiers didn't even make a sound before they died. They didn't even know who killed them or what the killer looked like. Chapter 639. One of the main training for scouts was to take care of their enemies both in the open and in the dark. Facing these Bai Ming soldiers who were completely defenseless and in a scattered formation, it was too easy for them to complete their mission. They killed one person with a single slash. Any Ming soldier who had their mouth and nose covered by them from behind would have blood spurt out from their necks. Then, they would fall into eternal darkness and die. The entire process was very smooth. Although the Bai Ming soldiers still discovered something in the end, when there were less than 20 of them left, it was already too late for them to counterattack. When the scouts pounced on them one by one like fierce tigers, everything was over. From beginning to end, the 200 Bai Ming soldiers did not make any loud noise, and did not alarm Zhang Mingji and the 300 cavalry at the foot of the mountain. In fact, even if they made a noise now, it was not important for the overall situation. Ding Shan and Gao Danhua who had entered the village had already received the signal from the mountain and launched a cavalry attack. Battalion Commander Gao Danhua led her 400 cavalrymen and charged forward at high speed. Company Commander Ding Shan led his 100 soldiers to guard the entrance of the village. Each of them held a long machete in their hands, looking like they were guarding the pass, preventing any enemy from escaping from here. The reason they chose Horn Mountain Call was because it was easy to enter and difficult to leave. It was to prevent Ding Shan and the others from suddenly escaping when they saw that the situation was not good. But now, they had to jump into the hole that they had dug for the other side. Get on your horses, quickly get on your horses and prepare to meet the enemy. Vice Qianhu Zhang Mingji saw the sudden attack of the cavalry, causing the ground to tremble. At this moment, he was really scared. He panicked and shouted at the 300 cavalry. The 300 cavalry from the Twin Cities did not expect such a thing to happen. They came here to receive their warhorses. Even if they wanted to fight, they had to wait for the cavalry from the Jian Province Left Guard and the Mao Yan Guard to appear together. What was the situation now? The reinforcements had not yet appeared, and they were about to start fighting. The cavalry from the Twin Cities were completely unprepared. Under Zhang Mingji's yelling, they all hurriedly got on their horses. Just as they were done, Gao Donghua's 400 cavalrymen were already within 100 meters of them. This was already within the effective range of the archers on horseback. Waves of arrows fell like raindrops, smashing into their bodies. Thump thump, thump thump. Before they were ready, dozens of northern Ming cavalrymen were shot in their vitals by arrows and fell from their horses. Some of the cavalrymen were quite lucky. Although they were shot in their vitals, they were not shot in their vitals and were still able to fight. Zhang Mingji was one of the luckiest. He knew that the situation wasn't good since he hadn't been hit by the arrows. He shouted again, "Counterattack with arrows. Prepare to counterattack with arrows." The outcome of this cavalry clash was predestined from the very beginning. Against the unprepared, they were prepared for battle but unprepared. Allowing Zhang Mingji to yell and order them around was just a futile attempt to resist. It was only a distance of 100 meters. For the elite cavalry, it was just a blink of an eye. The poor Baiming cavalrymen were still taking out their bows and arrows from their quivers. Their opponents rushed over so quickly that they didn't have time to draw their sabers. Many of them were cut down by the cavalry. Under the protection of more than a dozen soldiers, Zhang Mingji was lucky enough to rush out of the battlefield and rushed straight to the entrance of the village. His goal was very simple. He wanted to escape from here and then meet up with the reinforcements from the Jian province left guard and the Maoyan guard. Then he would go back and slaughter Ding Shan and the others. Daring to have ideas about them, they were really courting death. Zhang Mingji had indeed forgotten that he also had ideas about the other party. He had even been prepared to steal horses and kill people because he would never allow the news of him stealing goods and killing people to spread. But now, his opponent was giving him a taste of his own medicine. Coming. Coming. Kill. Seeing Zhang Mingji leading more than a dozen cavalrymen to the entrance of the village, Ding Shan, who was guarding here, had a trace of excitement on his face. Then he waved his large saber and directly went up to meet them. This 2-meter-long saber was also called a saber. It was one of the most common weapons used by infantrymen to deal with cavalrymen. With its length, as long as the timing was right, it could often chop off the front hooves of a high-speed warhorse and flip the enemy to the ground. Although warhorses were very precious, in times of danger, a person's life was even more important. It was only a dozen warhorses, so it was fine to chop them up. They couldn't let them escape. The sixth young master had given a strict order that none of the enemies who had seen them were allowed to escape. Swish! Swish! As the warhorses fell to the ground one by one, the Baiming cavalrymen also fell from their horses. Before they could do anything like turn over, a saber that flashed with a cold light had already landed on their bodies, chopping their bodies into pieces. They couldn't be more dead. Zhang Mingji's luck finally ran out. With his warhorse's front hooves cut off, he also fell from his horse. Then, what greeted him was 3 sharp sabers falling down. He didn't even have the time to ask who his opponent was. Why did they have the guts to go against the Baiming army? His head was separated from his body. At this moment, he couldn't be more dead. 300 cavalrymen, they were either shot to death by arrows, fell in the path of the cavalrymen's charge, or died in the path of escape. In the end, not a single one was left. Gao Danhua and Ding Shan also didn't have any intention of keeping anyone alive. Whenever they discovered that a Ming soldier was not completely dead, they would go up and stab him. Their movements were fast and precise. It was obvious that this was not the first time they had done this. Fortunately, Zhang Mingji had already given the order that all the civilians in Hornhill Call could only stay in their homes. No one was allowed to go out. Otherwise, they would be killed without mercy. Originally, he didn't want people to see him kill people and steal horses. Now, it helped Ding Shan, Gao Danhua and the others. They didn't need to raise their sabers and do anything to the innocent civilians. Quickly clean up the battlefield and leave this place. Gao Danhua gave the order. Ding Shan and the cavalrymen began to carry it out. After less than an hour, Hornhill Call had once again returned to its original tranquility. Only the smell of blood still filled the air and didn't dissipate for a long time. Outside Hornhill Call, it was not peaceful at this time. The 300 Maoyan Guard cavalrymen that had come from Maoyan City were facing the combined attack of the 1st Battalion of the Cavalry Division, Dengyu, and the 3rd Battalion, Ma Xiangshan. The Maoyan Guard cavalrymen also suddenly met the enemy without any preparation. First, there was a wave of archers attacking from afar. Then, there was a close-range charge. 800 against 300. Adding on that the cavalry division's sabers were so sharp, there were occasionally some beiming cavalrymen who wanted to put up a fight. But after a few swings on the horses, they sadly found that the sabers in their hands had broken from the middle due to the quality of the sabers. Facing the Mao Yan Guard cavalrymen with broken sabers, no matter if it was Deng Yu or Ma Xiangshan, no one would be polite. Who could say that the quality of a weapon was not another manifestation of a powerful hairstyle? Taking advantage of your weakness to take your life. After a flurry of sabers, the 300 Mao Yan Guard soldiers were completely annihilated. The cavalry division only lost one person and more than 10 people to take down 300 warhorses. Time went back 4 hours. In the 3 battles, the first to act was the main force of the mercenaries led by Yang Qindong. Their opponent was the left guard cavalry of Jian province. This time, there were 2,000 of them. From afar, they looked like a long dragon. Once they appeared, they would cause waves of tremors, giving people the feeling that they were a mighty army with thousands of men and horses. Because they were the furthest from Hornhill Call, the Jian province left guard cavalrymen were the first to set off. When the sky had just brightened, they set off from the city. By the time they reached the Stone Mountain area, it was already around 9 in the morning. In comparison, Yang Qindong's troops came even earlier. They had already arrived yesterday and chose the best battlefield. Relying on the fact that the Stone Mountain area was mostly stone, they chose a path between 2 mountains as the ambush location. Although it was called a mountain, it was not as tall as a real mountain. It was only about 20 meters high and was completely bare, showing the nature of a stone mountain. However, the height of 20 meters was enough to make Yang Qindong very satisfied. First, he arranged for the soldiers to place piles of stones at the exit between the 2 mountains to block it. This was to ensure that the enemy could only be a turtle in a jar after entering here. Then, he began to arrange the specific location and tasks for the ambush for each battalion. The political commissar of the 2nd Regiment and the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Chen Bo, was responsible for the attack on the left side of the mountain. The commander of the 3rd Battalion, Chun Yang, was responsible for the attack on the right side of the mountain. The regimental commander and the commander of the 1st Battalion, Wu Sheng, was responsible for blocking the enemy's retreat. At the same time, each battalion brought 2 auxiliary battalions to ensure that the task could be completed smoothly. In this battle, besides Yang Qindong himself riding the white dragon horse, there was no other horse accompanying him. However, when facing an enemy of 2,000 cavalrymen, he was still full of confidence. This was an ambush. His troops were nearly twice the number of the enemy, and they were equipped with advanced flintlocks. There was no possibility of failure. Now, he just had to wait for the enemy to appear on time. Liang Xian, the commander of the Jian province left guard, also had the same idea as Yang Qindong. Personally leading 2,000 cavalrymen, this force was equivalent to walking sideways in the vicinity. It was fortunate that they did not cause trouble for others. Who would dare to have any ideas about him? Moreover, with the combat power and speed of 2,000 cavalrymen, even if they encountered the enemy, they could completely rampage. There was no need to consider or worry about anything. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.